Hi guys, tonight we're drifting back to the first warm crumbs of human history, to the smoky edge of ancient firelight, where bread is not yet a loaf, not yet a bakery, not even a proper idea. Really, just a strange little miracle happening between stone, seed, water, and heat. What if one of the most ordinary foods in your kitchen began as an accident in the dark? What if the smell of toast, that cosy signal that life is briefly under control, once belonged to people sleeping under stars, listening for animals beyond the fire? You can almost see the sparks rising, the grass is swaying, the rough stones waiting to grind. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what your local time is right now. Maybe it is midnight, maybe 3 a.m., maybe bread o'clock, which is technically every hour if you're brave enough. Now, dim the lights, and you find yourself standing in a world before fields, before ovens, before wheat has learned to behave itself. The night air is cool on your skin. It smells of dust, dry grass, wood smoke, and the faint nutty scent of seeds crushed between stones. Around you, people move slowly in the amber light. They are not farmers yet. They are gatherers, hunters, careful watchers of the land. They know which grasses ripen after the rain, which seed heads shatter too quickly, which plants hide bitterness behind a harmless face. Their knowledge is not written down, but it lives in hands, in memory, in the quiet teaching of children who are shown, again and again, how to survive. You kneel beside a flat stone. Its surface is worn smooth by work. Another stone rests in your hands, heavy and cool at first, then warmer as your fingers curl around it. You press wild grains beneath it, rocking forward and back. The sound is soft but steady, a gritty whisper, like sand thinking very seriously about becoming dinner. Small husks break. Pale meal gathers in shallow grooves. It is not flour as a modern baker would know it. It is coarse, uneven, flecked with bits of plant and earth. But it is food. Long before neat golden fields, people in parts of Southwest Asia were already gathering wild cereals such as barley, einkorn, and emmer. A mainstream historical fact sits quietly here. Archaeological evidence shows that humans used grinding stones thousands of years before agriculture became fully established. At sites connected with very ancient communities, researchers have found traces of ground plant foods, suggesting that the story of bread begins earlier than the plough, not with a grand invention, not with someone announcing, "Congratulations, everyone, civilization starts Monday." No. It begins with hunger and patience, which is somehow much more human. You add water to the crushed grain. Perhaps not you alone, but someone like you, someone with ash on their hands and smoke in their hair. The mixture thickens into a paste. It clings to your fingers, sticky and cool. Maybe it is shaped by instinct into a flat pat. Maybe it is dropped by accident onto a hot stone beside the fire. Maybe someone is tired, distracted, slightly annoyed, because prehistoric life did not come with gentle background music and a snack drawer. The paste darkens, its edges firm, a toasted smell rises, and there it is. Not bread as you would buy it in paper wrapping, not bread that sighs when sliced, but something close enough to make your stomach pay attention. A cooked grain cake, a flatbread ancestor, a warm, chewable answer to the ancient question. Can we make these seeds less exhausting to eat? You lift it carefully. The surface feels rough and warm, with a brittle edge and a softer middle. When you bite, it tastes smoky, earthy, slightly sweet from the grain, perhaps a little gritty. You may get a crunch of husk. You may also decide, politely, not to mention it. Around the fire, others taste it too. Someone chews slowly. Someone else reaches for more. No one calls it history. They simply know it helps. There is a quirky little tidbit hiding in this early world. Some of the oldest bread-like remains yet studied came from a site associated with Natufian people in the eastern Mediterranean region, and they appear to be older than settled farming. That means bread, or something very bread-like, may have tempted humans before humans fully committed to agriculture. Imagine that. Bread did not just come from civilization. It may have helped lure civilization into being, like a warm flatbread whispering, "Settle down, build a village, buy too many storage baskets." Truly, carbs have always had influence. Still, historians and archaeologists do not agree on every detail. Scholars continue to debate whether early bread was a rare special food, made for gatherings and rituals, or whether it was already a practical part of daily eating whenever wild grain was available. The evidence is delicate. Burned crumbs, starch grains, stoneware patterns, small chemical traces. These are not exactly talkative witnesses. They do not sit up and explain the menu. So you move through uncertainty, as historians often must, with one hand on fact and the other on imagination. The fire pops. Somewhere beyond the circle of light, insects sing in the dark. You hear low voices, the scrape of stone, the crackle of dry twigs collapsing into embers. The air feels close and smoky, but comforting too, because warmth means safety, and cooked food means more than taste. Cooking changes grain. It softens starch. It makes some nutrients easier to use. It turns a handful of hard seeds into something that can be shared, carried, remembered. You begin to notice how much work hides inside this small cake. Someone gathered the grain at the right season. Someone beat the seed heads into a basket. Someone winnowed husks in the wind. Someone ground the kernels, slowly, patiently, shoulder muscles aching. Someone protected the fire. Someone watched the paste as it cooked, learning timing by smell and colour. Bread is never just bread. Even here, in its earliest shadow, it is cooperation made edible. The people around you do not live easy lives, but they are not dull or helpless. They experiment, they compare, they remember. Perhaps one batch tastes better when the grain has been soaked. Perhaps another holds together when mixed with roots or nuts. Perhaps a forgotten paste left overnight changes slightly, becoming sour, bubbling faintly with wild microbes from air, hands, vessels, and grain. No one knows yeast by name. No one needs to. The world is already full of invisible helpers and tiny saboteurs, all working without permission, as usual. A breeze moves through the grass. You feel it brush your arms. In the distance, the horizon is deep blue, and above it the stars spread out with impossible brightness. There are no streets, no mills, no bakeries opening at dawn, no impatient customer asking whether the sourdough is gluten-free. There is only the fire, the grain, the hands, and the slow discovery that the earth can be persuaded into comfort. You sit closer to the embers. Warmth presses against your face while the night cools your back. The first bread is not a single invention with a neat birthday. It is a long relationship, made from many small attempts across many landscapes. People learned to grind, mix, toast, roast, soak, and share. They learned that seeds could become strength. They learned that a simple food could gather people into a circle. And as you hold that rough warm piece in your palm, you feel the beginning of something enormous, though no one around you can see it yet. This small flat cake will someday become wages for labourers, offerings for gods, rations for armies, symbols of faith, signs of class, reasons for anger, and comfort for tired bodies at the end of long days. For now, it is quiet. It steams gently in the cold night. You taste smoke, grain, ash, and possibility. Morning spreads slowly over a small farming village, pale and gold, touching the tops of mud brick walls and the bundled roofs of reed and thatch. You wake to the sound of animals shifting in pens, a child coughing softly, a wooden door creaking open. The air is cool enough to make your shoulders rise, but the hearth ash still holds a little warmth. Outside, the world smells of damp earth, smoke, crushed straw, and grain stored in clay-lined pits. It is not a city. It is not yet the grand stage of kings and armies. It is a place of baskets, blisters, and breakfast. You step into the open space between houses, where work has already begun. People bend over grinding stones, their bodies moving in a rhythm as old as habit. The stones make a low, rasping sound, steady and patient. Grain is poured, pressed, dragged, pressed again. The motion looks simple until your own hands try it. Then your wrists complain, your shoulders join in. Your back adds a thoughtful little protest. Bread, you realise, has always asked for effort before it offers comfort. Here, farming has begun to change the shape of life. Communities in the Fertile Crescent and nearby regions learned to cultivate grains such as wheat and barley, slowly selecting plants that held their seeds longer and grew more predictably. This is one of the great mainstream facts of human history. Agriculture allowed more settled villages to form, and cereal crops became central to their survival. But it was not a clean, cheerful upgrade with everyone applauding beside a field. Farming meant staying put. Staying put meant storage, property, pests, arguments, and the exciting new possibility of wondering who stole your grain. You walk past storage bins sealed with clay. Their surfaces are cool and dry beneath your fingertips. Inside them rests a kind of future. Grain is not only food for today, it is a promise against hunger months from now. It can be counted, guarded, traded, borrowed, owed. A basket of grain is suddenly not just a basket of grain. It is security, it is temptation, it is power, sitting there quietly and attracting mice with absolutely no respect for human progress. Near one wall, a woman tips ground meal into a shallow bowl. She adds water carefully, then a pinch of something saved from yesterday's mixture, perhaps simply because it made the last batch taste better. The dough is thick and pale, tacky against her fingers. She pats it into rounds and lays them near hot stones. The smell begins, gently warm cereal, faint smoke, a sweetness that seems to rise from the ground itself. Your stomach notices before your mind does. It is always helpful that the body votes early. These village breads are mostly flat, cooked on stones in ashes or against heated surfaces. Some are coarse and dense. Some may include seeds, pulses, nuts, or wild plants. Texture depends on the grain, the grind, the water, the cook, and the mood of the fire, which is a moody colleague at best. The bread may crack at the edges, it may scorch in spots, it may be chewy, smoky, and filling. No one is writing reviews. Thank goodness. No one is saying mouthfeel while everyone else tries to remain polite. You sit nearby as the first rounds are lifted from the heat. One is placed into your hands. It is hot enough that you pass it from palm to palm. Its surface is dusty with ash, and when you tear it open, steam slips out in a soft breath. The inside is dense but tender. You chew slowly. The flavour is plain, but not empty. It carries the field, the stone, the fire, and the hands that shaped it. A quirky tidbit belongs to the grinding stones scattered through such early settlements. Archaeologists studying ancient skeletons have found signs that repetitive grinding could leave marks on bones and joints, especially in knees, toes, backs, and shoulders. Even teeth could suffer from stone grit mixed into flour, so in a very real sense, early bread could come with a side order of dental misery. Delicious. Sometimes gentle on the molars, not always. History rarely lets comfort arrive without a tiny invoice. Children watch the adults work. Some chase each other between walls. Others learn by copying, grabbing handfuls of chaff, spilling more than they carry, receiving patient corrections or less patient ones, depending on the hour. The village is alive with small sounds, goats bleating, clay pots clinking, grain rattling into baskets, a baby fussing, someone laughing at a mistake. Smoke hangs low beneath a roof opening. It stings your eyes just a little. Your tunic feels rough at the shoulder. Dust gathers at your ankles. Everything is practical, textured, close. Bread also begins to shape time. There is the time to sow, the time to harvest, the time to thresh, the time to grind, the time to bake. A day can be organised around the making of food that must be shared quickly or stored carefully. A year can be measured by whether the grain rises well or fails. Weather becomes personal. Rain is no longer just rain. It is survival falling from the sky. Drought is not merely inconvenience. It is fear with cracked lips. Historians still debate how quickly people accepted farming as a better way to live. Some argue that cultivation offered stability and supported growing populations. Others point out that early farmers often worked harder, ate less varied diets, and suffered new diseases from living close together with animals. The evidence suggests no single simple answer. You can feel that uncertainty in the village itself. There is comfort here, but also pressure. There is food in the bins, but everyone knows bins empty. As the sun climbs, the village warms. The smell of fresh bread mixes with dung fuel, wet clay, and trampled straw. You hear a hand mill turning in another house, then another. The entire settlement seems to hum with grain being transformed. It is not glamorous. It is not quiet in the dreamy way people sometimes imagine the distant past. It is busy, smoky, sore, clever, and deeply human. A group gathers near a shared oven pit. Someone brings dough. Someone brings fuel. Someone brings news from a neighbouring settlement, a field damaged, a marriage arranged, a dispute over stored grain, a strange bird seen near the water. Bread becomes an excuse to talk. Waiting for food creates a circle. In that circle, memory travels. Warnings travel. Jokes travel too. Because even in prehistory, somebody has to make a comment about the person who burned the edges again. You notice how settlement changes relationships. When people stay in one place, houses become more than shelters. They hold tools, grain, ancestors, stories. Bread belongs to that rooted life. It is made from the fields people return to, the stones they wear down over years, the hearths they rebuild, the seeds they save. Each loaf or cake is small, but it ties the body to a place. By late morning, heat gathers against the walls. The first meal is nearly finished, crumbs cling to fingers. A dog noses hopefully near the hearth and is ignored with practiced skill. The village continues its work mending, sorting, carrying, grinding. You feel the roughness of grain dust on your skin and the heaviness of food settling warmly in your stomach. This is not just survival anymore, it is routine, and routine has a quiet magic of its own. You look across the fields beyond the village edge. The grain heads move in the breeze, soft as whispered speech. They're fragile, ordinary, and astonishing. From them come meals, storage, trade, obligation, and community. From them comes a new way of imagining tomorrow. Bread has helped turn wandering paths into worn doorways, fires into hearths, and hunger into something that can be planned for, at least when the weather behaves. Which of course it does only when it feels like it. The village breathes around you, warm with smoke and effort. You hold the last piece of flatbread, now cooling in your hand. It is simple food, but it carries a new world inside it, land claimed, seasons watched, labour shared, and the first quiet outlines of society rising like heat over stone. The Nile Valley opens around you in a long green ribbon, shining beneath a sky so wide it seems almost painted. You stand where dark river mud meets the pale edge of desert, and the contrast is startling life on one side, silence on the other. The morning air is warm, carrying the smell of wet silt, reeds, cattle, smoke, and grain. Somewhere nearby, a donkey complains with the ancient confidence of donkeys everywhere. It is not musical, exactly, but it is honest. You walk toward a settlement where Egypt is learning to make bread into something larger than food. The river has flooded and withdrawn, leaving rich soil behind. Fields of emmer wheat and barley grow where water once spread. Farmers move through the land with wooden tools, bare feet pressing into damp earth. Their work depends on the flood, on careful timing, on labour organised by families, estates, temples, and officials who are already very interested in counting things. Grain matters here so much that it becomes tax, wage, offering, and survival. The Egyptian state will rise with bread at its centre, and honestly, if you're going to build pyramids, temples, and bureaucracy, you do need snacks. Inside a shaded courtyard, women and men prepare grain for baking. You hear the scrape and thump of pounding tools, the hush of flour being sifted, the dry rattle of husks. The flour is not perfectly white. It is beige, coarse, alive with the texture of stone-ground emmer. Fine dust floats in the air and settles lightly on your arms. It smells earthy and faintly sweet, like a field turned into powder. Someone mixes flour with water in a broad vessel. The dough clings to the sides, thick and elastic. Then comes the marvel fermentation. Wild yeasts and bacteria living invisibly in the air, grain, vessels, and leftover dough begin to change the mixture. They feed, release gas, create flavour, and soften texture. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Ancient Egyptians became famous for leavened bread, and their art and archaeology show a rich bread culture with many loaf shapes, baking methods, and grain preparations. They did not invent every kind of bread, of course. History rarely allows one tidy inventor to stand under a spotlight. But Egypt made raised bread ordinary, organised, and meaningful on a grand scale. You lean closer to a bowl of resting dough. The surface is slightly swollen, almost breathing. When a baker presses it, it springs back a little. It smells sour, warm, and pleasantly alive. This is not the plain flat cake of a quick fire. This dough has waited. It has changed in the waiting. Bread here has learned patience. Nearby, clay moulds are being heated. Some are tall and conical, set upright near the embers. Others are shallow. Ovens glow with a soft orange light. Heat presses against your face, dry and intense. Bakers move with practiced speed, because dough is demanding. It doesn't care whether you're tired. It rises when it rises. It collapses when offended. It has the personality of a small domestic spirit. The dough is shaped, poured, or pressed into hot moulds. The outer surface begins to set. The smell thickens into something deeply comforting: toasted grain, clay, ash, and sour sweetness. You hear the crackle of fuel, the slap of dough, the murmur of workers, the distant call of someone driving geese away from a basket. Ancient Egypt is often imagined as gold masks and solemn statues. But here it is, flour on fingers and smoke in eyes. It is lunch. Bread feeds households, labourers, priests, scribes, and rulers. Tomb paintings show bread-making scenes, because food was not only needed in life, it was imagined as necessary in the afterlife too. Offerings of bread and beer appear again and again in Egyptian religious practice. To give bread to the dead was to continue care beyond breath. To place loaves before gods was to make nourishment sacred. You feel that connection in the warm courtyard, where the ordinary and divine sit closer than modern minds often expect. A quirky detail rises from the ovens of Egypt. Some loaves were shaped into forms that seem almost playful, including spirals, triangles, discs, cones, and figures that may have been made for rituals or special occasions. Bread could be practical, symbolic, and slightly theatrical. There were even breads sweetened or enriched with ingredients such as dates, figs, fat, or honey when available. So, yes, ancient Egyptian baking could occasionally lean toward the dessert table, which feels fair. If you have spent the day hauling stone or recording grain taxes, a sweet loaf is not decadence. It is emotional maintenance. You take a piece of newly baked bread. The crust is firm, dusted with ash at one edge. When you break it, the inside is uneven, with small pockets made by fermentation. Steam touches your face. The bread feels sturdy, a little gritty, warm enough to soften your fingertips. You taste sourness first, then roasted grain, then a faint sweetness. It is dense compared with modern bread, but lighter than an unleavened cake. It has personality. It might win no beauty contest against a glossy bakery loaf, but it would keep you walking through a long day under the Egyptian sun. Egyptian bread is also deeply tied to labour. Workers on royal and state projects were often paid in rations of grain, bread, and beer. These were not merely treats, they were the fuel of organised society. Large workforces needed predictable food. Bakers, brewers, farmers, potters, scribes, and transport workers all formed part of the system. You can almost hear the rhythm of administration in the background. Measure the grain, record the amount, bake the loaves, feed the crew. Repeat until someone builds something enormous and future tourists develop strong opinions about it. Still, historians do not agree on every detail of Egyptian baking. Researchers continue to question exactly how different loaves were made, how often certain breads were eaten, and whether some surviving bread remains represent everyday meals or ceremonial foods. Tomb scenes can be symbolic. Archaeological loaves can be difficult to interpret. Experimental archaeologists try to recreate recipes. But ancient flour, water, yeasts, and ovens do not politely match modern kitchen conditions. The past leaves crumbs, not instruction manuals. The sun rises higher. Heat shimmers above the courtyard. You hear sandals scuff on packed earth, jars being set down, a laugh from a worker whose hand has been swallowed by sticky dough. The smell of baking seems to spread through the settlement like a signal. Bread is ready. Life can continue. You move toward the riverbank with a loaf wrapped in cloth. The cloth is rough against your palm, and warmth seeps through it. Boats drift along the Nile, carrying grain, reeds, stone, pottery, people, gossip, and probably someone complaining about the price of something. Water laps softly at the shore. Birds call in the reeds. The green fields breathe under the sun. In this place, bread has become a foundation. It is daily food, sacred gift, taxable wealth, and proof that the Nile has kept its promise for another year. You hold the loaf and feel how much it contains river flood, black soil, human skill, invisible fermentation, clay oven, and the hunger of a civilization learning how to organize itself around grain. As afternoon light begins to soften, the bread cools in your hands. Its crust no longer burns, but it still carries warmth at the center. You tear another piece and chew slowly. The taste is simple, sour, smoky, and deeply calm. Around you, Egypt continues its work in the glow of the river, and every oven seems to breathe with the same quiet message from water and seed. People make endurance. The day settles into a warmer rhythm, and you find yourself near a cluster of ovens and brewing jars where ancient Egypt smells almost unfairly inviting. The air is thick with grain, smoke, wet clay, and a sour sweetness that seems to hover over everything. You hear the soft bubbling of fermentation vessels, the crackle of fuel, the scrape of baskets on packed earth, and the occasional sharp command from someone who clearly believes the world would run better if everyone listened the first time. Perhaps they're right. Perhaps they're just holding a hot pot. Here. Bread and beer are not distant cousins. They are close companions, both born from grain, water, and transformation. In Egypt, barley and emmer wheat can become loaves, mash, porridge, or drink, depending on how they are treated. Food does not sit in separate modern categories. It flows, it ferments, it thickens. It is chewed, sipped, offered to gods, paid to workers, packed for journeys, and poured into jars. The boundary between eating and drinking feels softer here, almost like the edge of warm dough. You step beside a brewer kneeling near a wide-mouthed vessel. Inside, a grain mash rests, heavy and pale, smelling of sweetness and tang. Some methods may have used partly baked bread or cooked grain cakes that were crumbled into water to help fermentation. Other methods likely used malted grains, soaked and sprouted so their starches changed into sugars. A mainstream historical fact is clear beer was a major staple of ancient Egyptian life, and bread and beer together formed a basic part of daily rations for many people. This was not the modern idea of beer as weekend mischief in a glass. It was nourishment, calories, hydration, and habit. You watch as liquid is strained through woven material. The brewer's hands are damp, shining with mash. The mixture drips slowly, cloudy and fragrant, into a clay jar below. It is not clear, fizzy, golden beer from a neat bottle. It is thicker, more rustic, perhaps mildly alcoholic, with suspended grain and a flavour shaped by local microbes. It would fill the stomach. It might also make a long workday feel slightly more negotiable, which is no small gift when the sun is behaving like a royal overseer. Nearby, bakers pull loaves from clay moulds. The smell of hot bread folds into the smell of brewing grain. One scent is toasted and dry, the other wet and sour. Together they form the perfume of ordinary survival. You can feel heat on your cheeks. Your fingers brush a jar whose clay surface is cool in the shade and gritty where dried mud clings. Everything here has texture. Even the air feels chewable. Bread and beer help organise labour. Workers on state projects, temple estates, farms, and workshops need regular rations. Grain is measured, processed, and distributed. Scribes record amounts with patient marks, because nothing says civilization like someone writing down how much lunch you're allowed to have. Those records matter. They reveal a society where food is administration, and administration is power. A ruler who can collect grain and redistribute bread can command work, reward loyalty, and calm discontent, at least when harvests are good and officials are not too greedy. A worker sits in the shade and receives a portion of bread with beer. You sit nearby, feeling the packed earth firm beneath you. The bread is coarse and warm. The beer is cool from its jar, thick on the tongue, sour and faintly sweet. It tastes like grain left to dream in the dark. You may not call it refreshing in the crisp modern sense, but after heat, sweat, and dust, it makes sense. It belongs to this climate, this labour, this river world. A quirky detail from ancient Egyptian brewing is that beer could be flavoured or strengthened in different ways, and some evidence suggests ingredients such as dates may have been used to add sweetness and help fermentation. Imagine a drink somewhere between bread, porridge, and a mildly cheerful date smoothie. Not elegant, perhaps, but useful, and probably more honest than many beverages with tiny umbrellas. The brewing area hums with life. Flies test everyone's patience. Dogs doze where the shade is deepest. A child carries a small basket and spills grain in a thin trail, immediately attracting birds with the efficiency of professional thieves. Someone laughs. Someone else groans. The world is ancient, but the mood is familiar. Food work always includes small disasters, and small disasters always invite commentary. Fermentation itself remains a mystery to the people around you. They understand results, not microbes. They know that old mash can help new mash, that certain vessels produce better flavours, that warmth matters, that timing matters. They do not know the names of yeasts or lactic acid bacteria, Yet their practice is refined through repetition. Knowledge lives in smell, touch, and memory. A brewer leans over a jar and inhales. That breath is a test. The nose is a laboratory, and rather a good one. Researchers continue to debate exactly how Egyptian beer was brewed in different periods and regions. Some ancient images seem to show bread being used in the brewing process, while residue analysis and experiments suggest several possible techniques. Scholars still argue whether the drink was usually thick and nutritious like liquid bread, or whether some varieties were more strained and drinkable. The answer may be yes to all of it, depending on time, place, class, and purpose. History likes variety, even when modern people beg it to be tidy. Bread and beer also enter sacred life. Offerings placed before gods often include both, paired like a formula of nourishment. Tomb inscriptions ask for bread and beer for the dead, as though the afterlife itself requires a dependable pantry. You pause before a small offering space where loaves and jars sit in careful arrangement. The smell of warm grain mingles with incense. The mood shifts. Daily food becomes ritual language. To offer bread and beer is to say, may you be sustained, may you continue, may hunger never find you. The afternoon grows heavy. Heat presses downward. Workers move more slowly now, but the ovens and jars remain active, patient, and necessary. You hear liquid poured, dough slapped, clay lids set into place. The village or work site depends on these repeated actions. No trumpet announces them, no monument names every baker and brewer. Yet without their hands, the larger achievements of Egypt would feel very hungry indeed. You hold a cup of cloudy beer and a piece of bread. Together they are soft, sour, filling, and strangely peaceful. They taste of grain transformed twice, once by fire and once by invisible life. They prove that humans do not merely take food from the world. They coax it, wait for it, warm it, ferment it, and turn it into culture. As the light fades, smoke rises blue into the evening. The ovens glow like small suns near the ground. Jars rest in shadow, quietly working. Bread cools in stacks. Beer settles in clay. The Nile moves beyond the fields with its dark, steady shimmer. You breathe in the sour sweetness of grain becoming more than grain, and the whole place seems to murmur with the gentle intelligence of people who learned that survival could be baked, brewed, shared, and blessed. You enter the classical world through a market street just waking into noise. The paving stones are cool beneath your sandals, damp in places where someone has thrown water to settle the dust. Stalls open beneath cloth awnings. Baskets thump onto wooden tables. A rooster announces himself with the confidence of a minor emperor. Somewhere, olives are being tipped from a jar, fish are being salted, and a baker's oven releases a warm breath of toasted wheat into the morning. Here, in the Greek cities and later across the Roman world, bread has become more than a village staple. It is business. It is identity. It is a mark of taste, status, and public life. You smell it before you see it, loaves browning in masonry ovens, flat cakes brushed with oil, barley breads made for ordinary tables, finer wheat loaves for those who can pay. The air carries smoke, yeast, sesame, fresh flour, and the faint sharpness of wine from a tavern that is either closing late or opening early. With taverns, honestly, the distinction can be delicate. You pause before a Greek bakery. The baker's arms are dusted white, his tunic streaked with flour. He reaches into the oven with a long paddle and draws out round loaves that crack faintly as they cool. The crust is pale gold, darker where the heat has kissed it harder. Customers lean close, judging with their eyes, their noses, and probably their opinions, which are always available in public markets. Bread in ancient Greece comes in many forms. Barley remains important, especially for the poor and for soldiers, while wheat is often preferred when available. The Greeks make flatbreads, raised loaves, cakes, and ritual breads. Some are plain, some are flavoured with honey, cheese, herbs, oil, or seeds. A mainstream historical fact belongs here by the classical period. Professional bakers were known in Greek cities, and bread was part of both daily diet and public culture. Food is no longer only prepared at home. It can be bought in the street, carried home warm, or eaten with other market foods. Civilization, it seems, has discovered takeaway. You buy a small loaf and hold it against your palm. It is warm, firm, and fragrant. When you tear it open, steam curls upward and vanishes into the bright morning. The crumb is denser than many modern breads, but springier than a simple hearth cake. You dip it into olive oil and taste wheat, smoke, fruitiness, and salt from your fingers. Around you, conversation rises like birds' prices, politics, gossip, complaints about officials, admiration for athletes, and the eternal question of whether that fish looks fresh enough to trust. Bread also enters Greek thought and ritual. It appears at sacrifices, household meals, festivals, and funerary offerings. It is used to scoop, accompany, soften, and share. At a symposium, guests recline and eat bread with wine, olives, cheese, and conversation that may begin elegantly and end with someone making a speech that could have been shorter. Bread is humble, but it sits near philosophy, poetry, theatre, and politics. It listens to everything and judges no one. Then the street changes. The Greek city gives way to Rome, louder, heavier, more crowded, carrying the scent of empire. You walk through a Roman neighbourhood where apartment blocks rise above narrow lanes. Carts creak, donkeys snort, vendors shout, public fountains splash. The bakery is not a small domestic corner now, but a serious urban workshop. Millstones turn, driven by human labour, animals, or water in some places. Grain is poured into hoppers, flour spills into sacks. Dough is mixed in large troughs. Ovens glow like red caves. In Roman towns, bakeries become common and recognisable. Pompeii, buried in the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, preserved bakeries with ovens, mills, and even carbonised loaves. That fact is almost painfully vivid. Bread was baking and cooling, being sold, being eaten, and then disaster froze ordinary life into evidence. You stand in imagination near one of those ovens, feeling the heat on your face, hearing the stone mills grind, smelling wheat and smoke, while daily business continues unaware of future museum labels. History can be rude like that. A quirky Roman tidbit waits on a bakery shelf. Some carbonised loaves found at Pompeii were round and divided into wedge-like sections, almost pre-marked for sharing. They look strangely familiar, like a wheel of bread you might tear apart at a table. There is even evidence that certain loaves may have been stamped, perhaps with the baker's name or household mark. Imagine branding your bread in the ancient world, not with a glossy logo and a social media strategy, thankfully, but with a practical stamp that says, in effect, yes, this respectable lump of carbohydrates came from us. Roman bread reveals social layers. The wealthy may eat finer wheat bread, sometimes whiter and softer, while poorer people rely more heavily on coarse loaves, porridge, and whatever grain is affordable. Soldiers carry hard biscuit-like rations, durable enough for travel and possibly for use as emergency construction material if truly desperate. City dwellers depend on bakers and grain supplies. Bread is not merely a meal. It is the edible side of urban planning. You walk into a Roman bakery where the air is thick with flour dust. It settles in your throat, dry and chalky. The floor feels gritty. A mule turns a mill in patient circles, hooves scuffing stone. The animal's hide smells warm and musky. Workers lift heavy baskets and slap dough onto benches. One baker checks loaves by tapping them, listening for the hollow note that says the inside is done. The sound is small but satisfying. Romans develop laws and systems around bread because crowded cities cannot depend on casual luck. Bakers form professional groups. Grain must arrive from distant provinces. Prices matter. Quality matters. Weight matters. A bad loaf is annoying in any century. But in a city where thousands rely on daily bread, it can become dangerous. The Roman state understands this. Feed the people, and the city breathes. Fail, and the mood sharpens very quickly. Yet scholars still debate details about bread consumption in the classical Mediterranean. How much bread did different classes eat compared with porridge, pulses, vegetables, cheese, or meat? How white was elite bread in practice? How often did ordinary households buy from bakers rather than bake at home? Evidence comes from texts, art, carbonized food, tools, and buildings. But each source has its blind spots. A poem may exaggerate. A law may reveal a problem rather than normal life. A preserved loaf may be ordinary or unusual. The past, once again, leaves enough crumbs to tempt you, but not always enough to satisfy you. By midday, the market is hot and busy. Bread travels under arms, in baskets, in cloths, and in the hands of children sent on errands. A woman tears a piece for a toddler. A labourer eats standing in the shade. A merchant breaks bread with cheese while arguing over accounts. A priest carries loaves toward a shrine. A soldier buys something hard, practical, and not especially charming. The same food moves through many lives, changing meaning with each hand that holds it. You sit on a stone step and let the city pass around you. The bread in your lap has cooled, but its crust still smells sweet when you break it. Dust touches your ankles. Sun warms the top of your head. Voices echo between walls. Somewhere inside the bakery, new dough is rising, swelling slowly in the heat, preparing to become tomorrow's comfort, wage, offering, snack, or argument. In these classical streets, bread has learned to belong to the crowd. It is no longer only the food of fields and hearths. It is a public expectation, a commodity, a craft, and a signal of rank. It feeds philosophers and dock workers, actors and scribes, soldiers and sleepy children. It gathers the city into one shared appetite, and as you taste the last warm piece, smoky and simple on your tongue, you feel the ancient market breathing around you, alive with the soft power of the loaf. You stand at the harbour of Ostia, where the mouth of the Tiber meets the sea, and the morning is already loud with empire. Gulls wheel overhead, crying sharply in the bright air. Ropes creak against wooden posts. Sailors shout from grain ships heavy with cargo. The water smells of salt, tar, fish, wet wood, and the sour sweat of men unloading sacks under a sun that has clearly never lifted a sack in its life. The breeze is pleasant, yes, but it does not do the work. Here, bread begins not in a kitchen, but in a system. Rome is enormous, hungry, and impatient. A city of such size cannot depend only on nearby farms. Grain must come from Sicily, North Africa, Egypt, Sardinia, and other provinces tied into Roman power. Ships carry wheat across dangerous seas, into harbours, up rivers, through warehouses, and eventually toward mills, bakeries, and mouths. The loaf you hold in a Roman street is not simply baked. It is organised. You watch porters move in lines, backs bent beneath sacks of grain. The cloth brushes their necks. Dust leaks from the seams and floats golden in the sun. Each sack makes a heavy sound when dropped onto a cart. The carts groan. Oxen snort. A clerk checks amounts with a wax tablet in hand, stylus moving in quick strokes. The grain is counted because food is never only food in a capital city. It is policy. It is promise. It is a delicate bargain between rulers and the ruled. A mainstream historical fact sits at the heart of this busy harbour. Rome developed a large public grain supply system, often known as the annona, to provide subsidised or free grain to eligible citizens. The system changed over time, but its purpose was clear. The city had to be fed. The people expected grain. Leaders who secured supplies gained approval. Leaders who failed invited unrest. Bread, in this world, is not quietly waiting on a table. It is standing in the middle of politics with flour on its sleeves. You follow the grain inland. Along the river, barges move slowly. Pushed and pulled against the current, the Tiber glints in the light, carrying reflections of warehouses, cranes, and men at work. The air changes as you approach the city. It becomes thicker, warmer, more crowded. You smell smoke from countless hearths, urine from alleyways, spices from shops, damp stone, animal dung, and bread cooling on racks. Rome does not smell like marble. Marble is quiet and clean in museums. Living Rome smells like everyone has been cooking, bargaining, sweating, and keeping animals too close together. Because they have. Inside the city, grain enters mills. Some are turned by donkeys or mules walking in slow circles around heavy stones. You hear the grind before you see it, a deep, steady scraping that seems to vibrate in your ribs. The animals move with patient resignation, hooves scuffing the floor. Workers pour grain into the mill and gather flour below. The flour is not perfectly fine. It is dusty, uneven, and valuable. It clings to skin, hair, tunics, lashes. A worker wipes his face and accidentally becomes more flour than man. The flour moves to bakeries where dough waits in troughs. Water is added. Leaven is mixed in. Strong arms fold and press the dough until it becomes smooth enough to shape. The bakery is hot and close. Your skin prickles near the oven. Smoke stings your eyes. Loaves are arranged with practiced care, then slid into heat. The first smell of baking rises slowly, gentle at first, then full and round. It softens the harsh edges of the city. For a moment, even Rome seems domestic, but the city's hunger is never small. Thousands upon thousands depend on grain distributions. Recipients may take grain home to grind and bake, or later receive bread directly in some periods and places. The details shift across the centuries, but the pattern remains: Roman power must manage food. Public officials inspect, transport, store and distribute. Private merchants profit, sometimes honestly and sometimes in ways that probably required a very flexible relationship with conscience. Ships can sink. Storms can delay cargo. Corrupt officials can skim supplies. Rats, those tiny unpaid tax collectors, can help themselves in storage. A quirky tidbit belongs to the grain ships themselves. Some were so large by ancient standards that writers marvelled at them, especially the vessels bringing grain from Egypt. People could treat the arrival of such ships almost like a public event. Imagine standing at the docks and watching your dinner approach in the form of a massive wooden ship, creaking under thousands of measures of wheat. It is both practical and theatrical. Very Roman. Really. Even groceries arrive with drama. You walk through a line of citizens waiting for grain. Some carry baskets, some bring sacks, some are cheerful, some irritated, some suspicious that the person ahead is receiving slightly more, because human nature has not improved as much as we like to claim. Children weave between adults. A man complains about the quality of the last distribution. Another mutters that politicians always remember the people when elections or trouble are near. The mood is not rebellion. Not today, but it is alert. Bread has become a public right in the minds of many urban Romans. Not every person benefits equally, and not every stomach is secure, but the idea is powerful. A ruler who gives grain presents himself as generous, fatherly, stable. Coins and monuments can celebrate abundance. Speeches can praise provision. Yet beneath the language of generosity lies necessity. Rome is crowded. Crowds eat. Hungry crowds speak loudly. Historians still argue about how effective the grain dole was at different moments in Roman history. Some scholars see it as a stabilizing welfare measure that helps support a huge urban population. Others emphasize its political use, a tool of popularity and control. There is also debate over how many people received grain, how much it met their full dietary needs, and how the system affected farmers and trade across the empire. The records are rich compared with many ancient topics, but still incomplete. Numbers shift, laws change. Ancient authors bring their biases, as authors do, with great confidence and no apology. You step into a warehouse where grain lies in vast heaps and sealed containers. The air is dry and dusty, smells of chaff, old wood, and stored warmth. Your footsteps are soft in the powder on the floor. A guard watches the doorway. He knows what is stored here. So does everyone. Grain is wealth that can be eaten. That makes it more dangerous than gold in a hungry city. From warehouse to mill, from mill to oven, from oven to hand, Rome's bread travels through layers of labour. Sailors risk storms. Dock workers strain their backs. Clerks count. Animals turn stones. Bakers wake before dawn. Officials argue. Citizens wait. A loaf is the final quiet shape of all that movement. When you tear it open, you do not see the sea crossing, the tax demand, the warehouse guard, or the mule circling the mill. But they are there, hidden in the crumb. Evening settles over the city, and Rome grows golden in the low light. Smoke lifts from rooftops. The streets remain noisy, but softer now, tired from the day. A family eats bread with beans and greens in a cramped upper room. A tavern serves bread with watered wine. A soldier chews a hard ration near a gate. A senator's table receives finer loaves, pale and carefully made. Different breads, different rooms. One empire of appetite. You stand near a bakery as the last heat fades from the oven mouth. The bricks still radiate warmth when you hold your hand close. Inside, embers glow red, then orange, then dim. The smell of baked grain lingers in the doorway, comforting and political at once. Rome's monuments may rise in stone, but its peace rests partly on flour. The city sleeps only if the grain ships come. The mills turn, the ovens burn, and bread keeps arriving before hunger becomes a crowd with a voice. You step into a quieter world, away from the shouting markets and groaning mills, into spaces where bread is handled with slower hands. The light changes. It falls through doorways, across woven mats, over stone floors, onto low tables where loaves rest beneath cloth. The air smells of lamp oil, smoke, baked grain, wine, incense, and human closeness. Voices lower here, not because people are less hungry, of course. Hunger remains very democratic, but because bread has begun to speak in another language too, the language of memory, offering, covenant, gratitude, and mystery. You enter a household at evening, a family gathers before a meal. The loaf is simple, round, and warm, marked by the hands that shaped it. Someone blesses it, someone breaks it. The sound is small, a soft crack of crust and a tender pull of crumb, yet the moment feels larger than the food itself. When bread is broken, it becomes shareable. When it is shared, people recognize one another. At a table, bread can say what words struggle to manage. You belong here. Eat, stay alive with us. Across the ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds, bread appears constantly in religious practice. In temples, loaves are offered to gods. In households, bread accompanies prayers. In Jewish tradition, unleavened bread carries the memory of departure and urgency in the Passover story. In early Christianity, bread becomes central to the Eucharist, associated with remembrance, sacrifice, and sacred presence. This is a mainstream historical fact. Bread becomes one of the most powerful religious symbols in the ancient world because it is both ordinary and essential. It is daily life made holy. You feel the texture of unleavened bread in your hand. It is thin, firm, and dry at the edges. It snaps more than tears. Its surface is blistered from heat, rough under your fingertips. The smell is plain and toasted, without the sour breath of fermentation. There is beauty in its simplicity. It is bread without waiting, bread made quickly, bread that remembers haste. A food can carry a story not by decoration, but by absence. No rising, no delay, no soft luxury, just flour, water, heat, and urgency. In another sacred space, you pass near a temple storeroom. Loaves sit among jars of oil, wine, fruit, and incense. Offerings are arranged carefully, almost tenderly. Bread given to a deity may later feed priests or temple workers, but its first meaning is devotion. The loaf becomes a bridge between human need and divine presence. You can smell resinous smoke curling from a burner. It catches in your throat, sharp and fragrant. The room is dim, warm, and still. Crumbs on stone seem suddenly important. A quirky tidbit lives in the ancient practice of sacred loaves. In some Greek and Roman rituals, special cakes or breads were shaped for particular gods, festivals, or symbolic uses. Some were moulded into animals, body parts, stars, or other forms that may seem charmingly specific to modern eyes. Imagine bringing a carefully shaped little bread offering and hoping the god appreciates the craftsmanship. Religion can be solemn, yes, but also practical, local, and occasionally a little biscuit-shaped. You move through a Jewish household preparing for a festival meal. The room is swept, lamps flicker. The smell of roasted food mingles with the dry warmth of unleavened bread stacked nearby. Fingers pass over the surface of the bread as if touching memory. Here, bread is not only nourishment, but a reminder of slavery, escape, uncertainty, and trust. It asks people to remember not in the abstract, but with the mouth. History enters the body as a taste. At another table, early followers of Jesus gather in a private home. Their setting is modest, low light, rough walls, murmured greetings, perhaps worry in the air, because small religious communities often exist beneath suspicion. Bread is placed at the centre, and it is blessed, broken, and shared. Wine follows. The gesture is intimate and charged with meaning. The bread is ordinary enough to be recognized by everyone, yet sacred enough to carry enormous theological weight. That combination gives it strength. A rare jewel can impress you, but bread can reach everyone. Scholars still debate how early ritual meals developed into later formal practices. Researchers question how closely the earliest Christian gatherings resembled Jewish blessings, Greco-Roman banquets, memorial meals, or a mixture of several traditions. They also debate how quickly symbolic interpretations became fixed. The evidence includes texts, liturgy, archaeology, and comparison, but much remains uncertain. People wrote about what mattered to them, not always what later historians most desperately wish they had explained. Very inconsiderate of them, but there we are. You sit in the hush of a room after bread has been shared. The atmosphere is soft, almost drowsy. A lamp flame trembles when someone moves. You hear sandals shift on the floor, a cup set down, a low voice speaking a blessing. The bread's warmth fades in your hand. A crumb sticks to your thumb, such a tiny thing, and yet it carries lore, story, hope, grief, and belonging. Bread works well as a sacred symbol because it depends on transformation. Grain must be cut, crushed, mixed, shaped, and heated. Leavened bread must also rise through invisible life. It is death and change, patience and fire, loss and nourishment. That may sound dramatic for something you might eat with soup, but ancient people understood transformation closely. They saw seed buried in soil and returning as a field. They saw dough swell without visible cause. They saw fire turn paste into food. The world was full of signs, if you knew how to look. Bread also marks social ethics. To share bread with a stranger can mean hospitality. To deny bread can mean rejection. To give bread to the poor can become charity, duty, or justice. In many traditions, food offered to others is never merely generous. It is moral. You cannot pray beautifully and ignore hunger without someone eventually noticing the contradiction. Bread has a way of making lofty ideas sit down at the table and behave. The smell of fresh loaves drifts from a nearby oven, and the sacred atmosphere does not remove the ordinary appetite inside you. That is part of the point. Spiritual life and bodily hunger are not enemies here. They touch. A blessing is spoken over something the stomach understands. The divine is approached through grain dust, warm crust, and the need to eat again tomorrow. You walk past homes, shrines, and gathering places as evening deepens. Through one doorway, a family tears bread into a stew. Through another, a priest arranges loaves before an image. In a small room, believers share bread in memory and hope. In a courtyard, poor neighbours receive pieces from someone with more than enough. The forms differ, but the gesture repeats: take, bless, break, give, eat. Night settles gently. The air cools against your cheeks. Smoke rises in thin lines toward the stars. Somewhere, the last loaf is wrapped for morning. Somewhere, crumbs are swept from a table with the side of a hand. Bread rests between the human and the holy, humble enough to be bitten, powerful enough to carry worlds of meaning. You hold a small piece on your tongue and let it soften slowly. It tastes of grain, fire, and remembrance. And in the quiet, it feels like a prayer that does not need to hurry. You arrive in a medieval village at the hour when mist still lies low over the fields, softening the edges of fences, trees, and thatched roofs. The air is cold enough to sting your nose. It smells of wet earth, wood smoke, animals, and the faint sourness of dough left near a hearth. Somewhere a cock crows, late and self-important, as though the sun has been waiting for his permission. You hear a bucket knock against a well, a cow shifting in straw, and the slow-turning creak of a mill wheel by the stream. Bread is everywhere here, but it is not free from rules. Grain grows in strips across open fields, worked by families who owe labour, rent, or produce to a lord. The manna shapes the rhythm of daily life. You can feel it in the paths people take, in the fields they plough, in the dews they grumble about under their breath. Wheat, rye, barley, oats, and maslin, a mixed crop often including wheat and rye, become the foundation of survival. A mainstream historical fact belongs firmly in this damp morning in medieval Europe. Bread was a central food for most people, and milling was often controlled through manorial rites, requiring peasants to use the lord's mill and pay a fee. You follow a woman carrying a sack of grain toward the watermill. The sack drags at her shoulder, rough against cloth. Her breath clouds in front of her. The path is muddy, sucking at shoes with each step. The mill stands beside the stream, its wheel turning steadily, dipping into water with a heavy splash and rising dark and shining. The sound is hypnotic. Rush, creak, grind, rush, creak, grind. It feels like the village has a mechanical heartbeat. Inside, the mill is dim and dusty. Fine particles float in shafts of grey light. The millstones rumble as grain passes between them. Your fingers brush flour on a wooden beam, soft as powder, though gritty if you rub it too long. The miller watches carefully, because everyone watches the miller. Millers have a reputation, not always fair, for taking more than their due. Of course, when a person stands between your grain and your bread, suspicion comes very naturally. Add a measuring scoop, and suddenly everyone becomes a philosopher of justice. The fee for milling might be paid in a portion of the grain or flour. It irritates people, but grinding by hand is exhausting. A good mill can process more grain with less human labour, and water power transforms village life. The Lord profits. The villagers save time. In theory. The miller stands in the middle, covered in flour and accusation. You listen as two villagers argue softly over whether the measure is generous or greedy. The millstones keep turning, completely uninterested in ethics. From the mill, flour returns to homes and bakehouses. Many villages have communal ovens, sometimes owned by the lord, where people must bake and pay another fee. A woman prepares loaves in her cottage, mixing flour with water, salt if she has it, and a piece of old dough for leavening. The cottage is low and smoky. The hearth gives off a tired orange glow. Your hands warm near it, then chill again when you step away. Dough rests in a wooden trough covered with cloth. It smells alive, tangy and warm, beneath the heavier odours of wool, smoke, and stored onions. You watch as she shapes the dough into dark, sturdy rounds. These are not delicate breads. They are built for work, for long mornings in fields, for dipping into pottage, for filling the belly when meat is rare and hunger is familiar. The crust will be thick. The crumb may be coarse. Bits of bran remain. Stone dust sometimes joins the flour, because medieval bread, ever generous, may bring unwanted minerals straight to the teeth. Not everything rustic is romantic. Some of it is just hard to chew. At the bakehouse, the oven is heated with bundles of wood or brush. Flames roar inside the chamber until the bricks hold enough heat. Then embers are raked out, the floor swept, and loaves slid in with a peel. The oven mouth glows, then darkens. The smell of baking bread spreads through the yard, deep and comforting, mixing with mud, smoke, and animal breath. People gather while they wait. They exchange news, complaints, rumours, and advice nobody requested. A quirky tidbit sits warmly in this scene in some medieval communities. People mark their loaves before sending them into a shared oven, using cuts, stamps, or distinctive shapes so they could identify them afterward. It is charming until you imagine the argument when two loaves look too similar. A communal oven could bake bread, yes, but it could also bake resentment to a lovely golden brown. Bread also belongs to monasteries. You enter one through a stone passage where the air is cooler, cleaner, and touched with beeswax and damp walls. Monks live by rules of prayer, labour, reading, and meals. In many monastic houses, bread is produced with care and grainlands help support the community. The bakehouse is quieter than the village yard, though not silent. You hear kneading, the shifting of trays, the murmur of a brother reciting words under his breath. Flour dust softens the sleeves of dark habits. The mood is disciplined, but human. Someone surely burns a batch now and then. Holiness does not prevent oven trouble. Monasteries preserve knowledge, manage estates, feed travellers, and give alms. Bread may be served in the refectory with ale, vegetables, fish, cheese, or pottage depending on rule, season, and wealth. It is also distributed to the poor at gates in many places. The act carries spiritual importance. Feeding the hungry is not an optional decoration on faith. It is expected, at least in principle, though practice varies because humans remain humans even when wearing serious robes. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were as universally miserable in their diet as older stereotypes suggest. Some evidence shows hard labour, vulnerability to famine, and heavy dependence on grain. Other studies of bones, record, and local conditions suggest more variety in certain places and seasons, including vegetables, dairy, fish, legumes, ale, and occasional meat. Bread was central, but medieval food was not one endless sad loaf eaten in the rain. It was seasonal, regional, unequal, and complicated. Which is historian language for please stop asking for one simple answer. By late afternoon, the baked loaves emerge. The crusts are dark brown, almost black at the edges where the heat has been fierce. You hold one wrapped in cloth. It is heavy, warm, and fragrant. When you press it, the crust resists. When it cracks, the sound is dry and satisfying. Inside, the bread is dense, moist and sour. It tastes of rye and wheat, smoke and ash, labour and waiting. You dip it into a bowl of thick pottage, and the bread softens, turning from stubborn to generous. Outside, the mill wheel continues its turning. The stream runs cold over stones. Evening smoke rises from cottages, blue in the fading light. The manor house stands apart. The church bell marks the hour, and the monastery beyond the fields gathers itself for prayer. In all these places, bread links labour to obligation, hunger to hierarchy, and community to the shared heat of an oven. You feel the loaf's warmth fading against your hands. Around you, the village settles into the slow quiet of night. Bread has become daily necessity, but also a measure of power. Who grows the grain? Who grinds it? Who owns the oven? Who pays? Who eats first? Who receives charity at the gate? Every question leaves its mark in the crust. The bread is humble. Yes, but it knows the whole village. It has passed through field, mill, manor, oven, and palm, carrying the weight of a world that survives one loaf at a time. You find yourself farther north, where the fields stretch under a colder sky and the wind moves with sharper teeth. The morning is grey, not gloomy exactly, but serious. It slides over wooden fences, low cottages, frozen puddles, and strips of grain that have learned endurance the hard way. The air smells of smoke, damp wool, sour dough, and turned soil. Under your boots, the ground feels firm in some places, muddy in others, as though winter and spring are still negotiating ownership. Here, wheat is not always the easy king. In colder and wetter regions of northern and eastern Europe, rye becomes a loyal companion to people who cannot depend on delicate harvests. It tolerates poor soils better than wheat, grows in harsher climates, and produces grain where other crops might sulk dramatically and fail. A mainstream historical fact stands in the chill air. Rye bread became a major staple across many parts of medieval and early modern northern Europe, especially among poorer communities and in regions where wheat was harder to grow. You enter a cottage where the hearth is alive with low red heat. The room is dim, close, and smoky. A pot hangs over the fire, sending up the smell of cabbage, onions, and something earthy simmering slowly. Near the wall, dough rests in a wooden trough. It is darker than wheat dough, heavier, stickier, almost clay-like beneath the cloth. When you touch it, it clings to your fingers with a cool, stubborn pull. Rye is not trying to impress anyone with airy elegance. Rye has work to do. The baker, sleeves rolled, scrapes the dough from the trough and shapes it with wet hands. The mass resists neat handling. It spreads and sags, dense with bran and whole grain. Rye contains less gluten strength than wheat, so it does not rise in the same lofty way. It depends heavily on sourdough fermentation, which helps the dough structure and improves flavour. The scent is deep and tangy, almost fruity, with a hint of damp cellar. Not glamorous, perhaps, but deeply comforting once your body understands it. You watch the loaf go into a masonry oven already heated by wood. The fire has been drawn out, and the bricks hold warmth like memory. The baker slides in the dark rounds, then seals the opening. Baking will be slow. Rye likes patience. It emerges not as a pale cushion, but as a serious loaf with a thick crust and a moist, close crumb. It is bread that looks as though it has seen weather. Outside, hunger is never an abstract idea. Harvest can fail. Rents and taxes can still be demanded. Grain prices can rise. In lean seasons, people stretch flour with peas, beans, acorns, chestnuts, bark meal, bran, or whatever local necessity suggests. Some mixtures nourish. Some merely fill. Some probably taste like a tree trying to become soup. You do not laugh too much, because desperation has its own dignity. When the rye loaf is cut, the knife moves slowly through it. The crumb is dark brown, almost purple in the damp light, sticky enough to cling slightly to the blade. Steam rises faintly, the smell is sour, roasted, and rich. You take a slice while it is still warm. It feels heavy in your hand, dense as a promise. The crust is chewy, the inside moist and tangy, with a flavour that deepens as you chew. It asks you to slow down. This is not bread you inhale while pretending to check one small thing. This is bread that makes you sit properly. A quirky and unsettling tidbit belongs to rye's long history. It is especially vulnerable to ergot, a fungus that can infect grain and produce toxic compounds. In some historical cases, contaminated rye may have caused outbreaks of illness marked by burning sensations, convulsions, hallucinations, and other terrifying symptoms. People sometimes called such suffering St. Anthony's fire. Not every strange medieval panic or vision can be blamed on ergot, despite the tempting simplicity, but the fungus was real, and rye could carry hidden danger. Bread, usually the comfort of the table, could occasionally arrive with a very poor sense of humour. In the village, people know grain can betray them. They may recognise dark, horn-like ergot bodies in the rye, and remove what they can, but knowledge varies, and hunger lowers standards. If the choice is risky bread or no bread, the decision becomes cruel. You feel that pressure in the room, the preciousness of each sack, the caution in sorting, the anxiety when stores run low. The scent of bread still comforts, but it has a shadow. Historians still argue whether ergot poisoning explains certain dramatic episodes in European history, including outbreaks of strange behaviour, visions, or social unrest. Some scholars see ergot as a plausible factor in specific local crises, especially where rye was heavily eaten and weather-favoured fungal growth. Others warn that the evidence is often circumstantial, and that disease, stress, religion, politics, and hunger can produce their own storms without help from a fungus. The past is rarely polite enough to provide a single villain. You carry a slice of rye bread into the open air. The wind touches your face and slides under your collar. Nearby, a woman spreads soft cheese on bread for a child. An old man dips his piece into thin soup, letting the dense crumbs soak up every drop. A field worker wraps slices in cloth for the day. Rye bread travels well, keeps longer than many lighter loaves, and strengthens the body through cold labour. It is not fancy. It is faithful. The village bakery smells different from wheat country. There is more sourness, more smoke, more long baking. Loaves cool on wooden boards like dark stones from the oven. Their crusts crack softly as they settle. Flour dust is grey-brown, not white. Hands are rough, sleeves are patched. The atmosphere is not miserable, but practical. With that northern talent for making endurance look ordinary, bread here is tied to class as much as climate. In many places, lighter wheat bread is preferred by the wealthy when available, while darker rye or mixed-grain bread feeds workers, peasants, and poorer townspeople. Colour becomes a social signal. A pale loaf can whisper privilege. A dark loaf can speak of fields, hardship, and resilience. Of course. The dark loaf may also taste better with smoked fish, onions, or cheese, so status has never had perfect judgment. By evening, the cold deepens. Smoke lies low in the lane. You hear the dull chop of wood, the mutter of animals settling, the creak of a door pulled shut against the wind. Inside the cottage, bread sits on the table beside a bowl of soup. The room glows with firelight. The bread is cut thick. It is shared without ceremony because ceremony is not always needed. Sometimes survival is sacred enough. You taste one final piece. It is sour, dense, earthy, and warm from the bowl you have dipped it into. It carries harsh fields, careful storage, fungal risk, class difference, and the stubborn intelligence of people making food from difficult land. In this cold country, bread is not soft romance. It is a dark, steady companion. It rests heavy in the stomach, keeps hands moving through long work, and reminds you that comfort does not always come pale and fluffy. Sometimes it comes in a thick rye slice, under a grey sky, with smoke in your hair and winter at the door. You step onto a road where dust rises softly beneath the hooves of pack animals, and the horizon seems to breathe with distance. The air is dry, bright, and scented with wool, leather, dung smoke, crushed herbs, and warm grain packed carefully for travel. Bells tied to camels and horses make a gentle clinking sound as caravans move forward, patient and swaying. The road is not one road, really, but a web of paths crossing mountains, deserts, oases, cities, and market towns. People will later call these routes the Silk Roads, because silk sounds elegant, but grain, flour, bread, and hungry travellers are here too, doing the less glamorous but very necessary work. You walk beside traders carrying cloth, spices, metal goods, paper, glass, medicines, and stories. Food travels with them in practical forms: dried noodles, flatbreads, hard biscuits, steamed buns, roasted grain, and cakes that can survive a journey without becoming a science experiment too quickly. Wheat itself spreads widely across Eurasia, while local grains and cooking methods shape what bread means in each region. A mainstream historical fact belongs to this long movement the Silk Roads connected East Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, helping foods, crops, techniques, and tastes move across cultures over many centuries. At an oasis town, you hear the market before you enter it. Donkeys bray, merchants bargain, metal bowls ring, and water splashes in a canal with a sound so gentle it feels luxurious after open road. The atmosphere changes at once. Dust gives way to shade. The smell of travel gives way to smoke, onions, lamb fat, tea, and bread slapped against hot oven walls. You follow the smell, because that is usually the wisest historical method. A baker stands beside a tandoor-like clay oven sunk into the ground. The oven's mouth glows with heat. He takes a round of dough, stretches it, stamps, or scores the centre, and slaps it against the inner wall. The dough sticks, hissing slightly. Your face warms as you lean close. In moments, the bread blisters and browns, its rim puffing while the centre stays flatter. He hooks it free with a metal tool and hands it over wrapped in cloth. It is hot, smoky, chewy, and faintly sweet from wheat. The surface is patterned, touched by heat and skill. Flatbreads are ideal travellers. They cook quickly, require simple equipment, and pair with almost anything. In Central Asia, Persian lands, India, the Caucasus, and the Middle East. Many breads are baked against oven walls, on griddles, under ashes, or over hot stones. Some are thin and flexible, some are thick and dimpled, some carry sesame or nigella seeds, some are brushed with fat. Each form answers a landscape and a way of eating. Bread becomes a plate, a spoon, a wrapper, a ration, and occasionally a napkin, though a delicious one. You sit in the shade with caravan people and tear bread around a bowl of stew. The bread feels warm and elastic between your fingers. It soaks up broth scented with cumin and garlic. Around you, languages overlap: Sogdian, Persian, Turkic, Arabic, Chinese, Sanskrit, Greek, and others depending on place and century. You may understand little, but eating helps. A piece of bread passed across a mat is a translation older than grammar. Farther east, wheat flour takes different forms. In parts of northern China, where wheat grows better than rice, dough becomes steamed buns, pancakes, dumplings, noodles, and breads baked or pan-cooked in many styles. You enter a kitchen where steam clouds the rafters and makes your skin damp. Bamboo baskets sit stacked above boiling water. When the lid lifts, a warm mist rolls out, smelling of wheat, yeast, and clean heat. Steamed buns are soft, pale, and tender. They do not crackle like oven bread. They sigh. A bun placed in your hand feels like a warm pillow that has accepted its destiny. A quirky tidbit waits in the shifting border between bread and noodle. Some legends credit the invention of certain stuffed buns to famous strategists or dramatic military moments. But these stories are often much later, polished by folklore until they shine more brightly than they prove. It is delightful to imagine a brilliant commander inventing a bun to solve a crisis, because apparently even warfare becomes more manageable with snacks. Yet the real history is likely slower cooks experimenting with flour, fillings, steam, and local taste over generations. In South Asia, you find another world of bread. The air is heavy with heat and spice. A cook rolls dough into thin rounds, dusting the board with flour. The rolling pin taps softly. The bread goes onto a hot griddle, then swells in spots as steam forms inside. Chapati, roti, naan, paratha, and many other breads belong to different regions, classes, ingredients, and occasions. Some are cooked dry, some are layered with ghee, some are baked in intense oven heat. The smell of browning wheat and melted fat fills the room, rich and soothing. You tear a piece and use it to gather lentils. It is soft, practical, and perfect. Bread traditions also move with religion, conquest, migration, and trade. Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, and local communities all carry food customs across routes. Bakers learn from neighbours, travellers bring preferences, empires build roads and disturb lives, because empires do both at once. A technique from one town may appear in another with a new name, a new filling, or a new shape. Culinary history is not a straight line. It is dough folded again and again until nobody can entirely separate the layers. Historians still debate how directly certain bread-making methods travelled along trade routes. Did a technique move because merchants carried it? Because migrants settled? Because armies marched? Because similar tools and grains led cooks in different places to invent similar foods independently? The evidence can be slippery. Recipes were not always written down, and when they were, they often assumed the reader already knew everything important, which is very on brand for old recipes and, frankly, many modern ones too. You cross a high pass where cold wind snaps at your cloak. Bread here must be durable. Travellers carry hard cakes, dried flatbreads, or flour to mix when fuel and water can be found. The touch of a stale travel bread is rough, almost sharp at the edge. It smells faintly sour from the cloth bag and the animal packs around it. Dipped into tea, broth, or fermented milk, it softens and returns to kindness. On a lonely road, even a hard crust can feel like companionship. In a caravanserai at night, the atmosphere becomes close and smoky. Animals settle in the courtyard, merchants unroll bedding, fires burn low, someone bakes fresh rounds on a metal plate, turning them quickly with darkened fingers. The bread puffs, chars, and collapses. You hear quiet laughter, whispered deals, a cough, the rustle of silk, the clink of a cup. Above, stars appear over the square of open sky. The bread is passed from hand to hand, and for a little while, strangers become a table. The Silk Roads carry luxury goods, yes, but also ordinary hunger. Bread changes as it travels because people adapt it to available grains, fuel, climate, ovens, and customs. A loaf can be stamped in an oasis, steamed in a northern town, stretched beside a desert road, fried in fat, or wrapped around spiced food under a hot evening sky. Each version says the same quiet thing in a different accent here, is grain made ready for the body. You rest against a wall warmed by the day's sun. In your hands is a piece of bread from the market, marked in the centre, blistered at the rim, smelling of smoke and sesame. It is both local and connected to worlds beyond the town gates. Caravans will leave at dawn. Languages will scatter across the road. Recipes will shift in memory. And somewhere, in another city. Another baker will press dough into heat. Not knowing that the road has already changed the shape of the meal, you arrive in Baghdad when the evening air is still warm, and the city glows with lamps, cooking fires, and the last gold of the sun on plastered walls. The streets are alive but not frantic. They breathe with the slow confidence of a place that knows caravans, scholars, cooks, poets, money changers, physicians, perfume sellers, and bread sellers all have business here. You hear hooves on packed earth, water sellers calling, copper bowls ringing, and somewhere nearby, the steady slap of dough against a hot oven wall. The smell is extraordinary. Smoke from bread ovens drifts through lanes scented with coriander, sesame, lamb fat, rosewater, vinegar, dates, and dust. It is not one smell, but a whole market arguing politely with your nose. You follow the warmest thread of it and find a bakery built into the side of a busy street. Men move quickly near the oven mouth. One stretches dough into a round, another stamps the centre, another reaches into the heat with a hook. The bread comes out blistered, shining slightly and soft at the rim. Across the Islamic world, from Baghdad to Cairo, Damascus, Cordoba, Nishapur, and beyond, bread is both daily food and urban craft. A mainstream historical fact belongs here during the medieval Islamic period. Large cities supported specialised food markets, bakeries, mills, and regulations that helped feed dense urban populations. Grain came from surrounding farms and wider trade networks, while city bakers turned flour into bread suited to local taste. Wheat, barley, millet, and other grains all had their place, depending on region, class, and price. You stand in the bakery doorway and feel heat roll over your face. The oven's interior glows deep orange. Ash dusts the floor. The baker's hands move so fast they seem to know the bread before the mind has time to interfere. Dough is slapped into heat, lifted, stacked, wrapped, sold. Customers arrive with coins, baskets, and opinions. The line shuffles forward. Someone complains that yesterday's bread was smaller. Someone else says it was perfectly fine. The baker looks as if he has heard both claims since childhood and has no plans to be emotionally damaged by either. Bread in these cities is varied. There are thin breads that fold around roasted meat, rounds that tear beautifully beside stews, crisp breads, enriched breads, ring-shaped breads, and sweetened pastries made for those with spare money and a forgiving conscience. Some breads are topped with sesame or spices, some are brushed with oil, others are plain and meant to be eaten quickly with lentils, beans, cheese, pickles, or soup. This city does not live on bread alone, but bread helps everything else become a meal. You carry a warm round into a market lane. Its surface is slightly rough under your fingertips, bubbled and browned in patches. When you tear it, the inside pulls gently, soft and elastic. You use it to scoop a thick bean dish, bright with herbs and sharp with vinegar. The bread catches sauce beautifully. It does not sit apart from food like a polite guest. It joins in. It becomes spoon, plate, and bite at once. In Cairo, the scene shifts, but the importance remains. The Nile feeds grain fields, and the city's appetite is immense. Bakeries and public ovens work through the day. Markets fill with loaves, flatbreads, and cakes. The smell of bread mixes with river air, donkey sweat, incense from mosques and shrines, and the sweetness of date syrup. You walk through a street where a boy balances a tray of breads on his head, moving with the calm skill of someone who has accepted gravity as a professional challenge. Cordoba offers another texture of the same broad world. In Al-Andalus, irrigation, gardens, trade, and urban refinement shape food culture. Wheat bread, olive oil, herbs, and sweets move through households and markets. Cookbooks from the broader medieval Arabic tradition record breads, pastries, sauces, and dishes with great care, though not always with the precision a modern anxious baker might want. A pinch, a handful, until it seems right. Very relaxing, unless you're actually trying to reproduce it. A quirky tidbit belongs to medieval Arabic food. Writing some recipes describe elaborate breads and pastries perfumed with ingredients like rosewater, musk, saffron, or camphor, flavours that may surprise a modern person expecting bread to stay in its plain little lane. Imagine a loaf that smells faintly of flowers and luxury, made for a table where food is also art, medicine, status, and pleasure. The humble grain has dressed up for the evening, and frankly, it looks confident. Bread also enters charitable life. In Islamic teaching, feeding the hungry is a deeply valued act, and cities often develop institutions, endowments, and habits of public generosity. Bread may be distributed to travellers, students, the poor, or worshippers. You stand near a mosque courtyard as the air cools. People wash before prayer. Sandals gather at the edge of mats. Afterward, someone shares bread and dates. The gesture is simple, but it carries a moral weight. Hunger is not just unfortunate, it is a claim upon the community. At the same time, bread is economic reality. Grain prices rise and fall, harvests fail. Officials worry about supply, weights, fraud, and unrest. Market inspectors, often associated with the office of the Muqtasib in many Islamic cities, can oversee fair dealing, cleanliness, and honest measures. Bakers may be watched to ensure they do not cheat customers with underweight loaves or poor flour. Of course, wherever there is regulation, there is someone trying to outsmart it. Humanity has never looked at a rule and said, "Lovely, I will never test that." Historians still debate how uniform bread regulation was across the Islamic world. Some sources describe careful market supervision, but practice must have varied by city, ruler, crisis, and local custom. Scholars also question how recipes from elite cookbooks relate to ordinary urban diets. Did common workers eat anything like the fragrant breads described for wealthy tables? Sometimes, perhaps, on festivals or in cheaper forms, often probably not. Written food culture loves fine ingredients, while daily hunger prefers whatever can be afforded before sunset. You listen to the city at night. A baker is still working because cities do not all sleep at once. The sound of kneading is dull and rhythmic. The oven sighs softly. Outside, a storyteller holds a small crowd at the edge of a square. A scholar passes with ink on his sleeve. A porter eats bread wrapped around onions and cheese, sitting with his back to a wall. The bread in his hand is not luxurious, but it is enough to make the evening kinder. In this world, bread travels between scholarship and street life, between palace kitchens and workers' hands, between charity and commerce. It is shaped by the same cities that preserve books, build observatories, translate philosophy, refine medicine, and argue over poetry. The ovens are part of that brilliance too. Not every light of an age comes from a lamp in a library. Some glow inside clay and brick, turning dough into warmth. You hold a final piece of bread as the market quiets. Its sesame seeds brush against your palm. The crust is thin, the centre soft, the taste smoky and faintly nutty. Around you, Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, and countless other cities seem to shimmer together in the lamplight ovens burning. Flour measured, hungry people fed, spices drifting, water flowing, prayers rising. Bread here is urban, fragrant, regulated, shared, and endlessly adaptable. It turns the vastness of empire and faith into something you can tear gently with your hands. You step into a medieval town just as the streets begin to brighten under a thin morning sun. The air is cool, damp, and busy with smells. There is smoke from hearths, wet leather from the shoemaker's lane, dung from passing animals, sour ale from a tavern doorway, and above it all, the deep warm smell of bread escaping from bakeries. Bells ring from a church tower, slow and metallic, telling people the hour as if anyone with flour on their hands has the luxury of forgetting time. This town is not a loose scatter of cottages. It has walls, gates, markets, tolls, officials, and rules. So many rules. Rules for where you may sell, what you may charge, how much a loaf should weigh, what kind of grain may be used, when ovens may burn, and what happens if your bread disappoints the public. Medieval urban life is not just mud and romance. It is paperwork with chickens walking through it. You enter the baker's quarter, where heat pours from open doors. Inside one shop, dough rises in wooden troughs. A boy carries water in a bucket that knocks against his knee. A baker dusts a bench with flour, then folds a heavy mass of dough with both forearms. His skin shines with sweat. His sleeves are rolled high. The room feels close and humid, warmed by bodies and ovens. Flour clings to eyelashes, hair, and the cracks in rough fingers. You hear the slap of dough, the scrape of peels, the creak of baskets, and the soft sigh of loaves settling as they cool. A mainstream historical fact sits squarely in this busy room. Many medieval towns regulated bakers through guilds, municipal laws, and official inspections because bread was an essential food. Authorities cared deeply about loaf weight, price, and quality. The connection was simple. When grain prices changed, bread prices and loaf sizes became sensitive matters. Hungry townspeople noticed. Officials noticed too, because a crowd angry about bread can become inconveniently energetic. The baker belongs to a craft world shaped by training and reputation. Apprentices learn by working long hours, sweeping floors, carrying fuel, mixing dough, and enduring correction. Journeymen move through shops seeking wages and experience. Masters own tools, ovens, and the right to sell under town rules. A guild may protect members, set standards, organize religious observances, and defend privileges. It may also exclude outsiders and make competition less friendly. The guild is part brotherhood, part business, part quality control, and part club with very strong opinions about who's allowed to touch the dough. You watch loaves being weighed, a town official enters with assistants. The room tightens. The baker's expression becomes very calm, which is usually how you know someone is not calm at all. Loaves are placed on scales, weights are checked, flour bins are inspected. The official cuts one loaf open to examine its crumb. Steam rises. The smell is beautiful, which does not necessarily save anyone from a fine. Bread laws often respond to the price of grain. In England, the assize of bread and ale, first issued in the 13th century and revised in different places over time, tied the weight and price of bread to the cost of grain. The idea was to prevent bakers from profiting unfairly when grain was expensive. Similar concerns existed in many European towns. People might accept that harvests failed, they might accept that prices rose. They were less patient with a baker suspected of quietly making loaves smaller while wearing an innocent face. A quirky tidbit appears in punishments for dishonest bakers. In some places, bakers who sold underweight bread could be fined, publicly shamed, placed in a pillory, or dragged through town with the offending loaf displayed. There are records and images of humiliating punishments designed to make dishonesty visible. Imagine being remembered by your neighbours not for your skill, your family, or your jokes, but because your small loaf got you paraded around like a tragic carbohydrate criminal. It is funny from a distance, up close. It is social ruin with crumbs. You follow the official into the street, where customers gather around baskets of bread. Some loaves are pale and fine, meant for wealthier households. Others are darker, coarser, cheaper. Bread is divided by quality and class. White bread made from well-sifted wheat flour is prized in many towns. Brown bread and mixed-grain loaves feed humbler tables. Horse bread, made from beans, peas, bran, oats, or mixed grains, may be eaten by the poor in hard times. Despite its name suggesting the horse should have been consulted first, the market sounds rise around you. Vendors call out prices. A woman taps a loaf with her knuckles, listening for firmness. A servant buys fine bread wrapped in cloth. A labourer chooses a cheaper round, heavy and dark. Children stare at sweet buns, glistening with honey or spice. A dog waits beneath a stall, wearing the hopeful expression of a creature who believes gravity and human clumsiness are natural allies. Guild rules do not remove tension, they may create it. Bakers complain that officials do not understand fuel costs, labour, spoilage, or the difficulty of making fair loaves when grain quality varies. Customers complain that bakers cheat, overcharge, use bad flour, or hide the good loaves for favoured buyers. Officials complain because everyone complains to them, which is perhaps why they become officials and develop stern eyebrows. Historians still debate how effective bread regulation was in practice. Some scholars argue that laws and guild oversight helped stabilise urban food supply and protect consumers. Others point out that repeated rules against cheating suggest cheating continued with impressive determination. There is also uncertainty about how consistently inspections occurred, especially during shortages, war, or political disorder. A law written on parchment is one thing, a hungry town, a nervous baker, and a fluctuating grain market are another. You stand beside a bakery window and feel the warmth on your face. The bread inside looks peaceful, stacked in rows, crusts golden and brown, but every loaf carries a negotiation between baker and customer, town and guild, grain price and wage, hunger and trust. Bread is too important to be left entirely to goodwill. That is the uncomfortable lesson written into the scales. Inside another shop, a master baker teaches an apprentice to mark loaves before baking. The cuts are quick and shallow, guiding expansion in the oven and giving each batch a recognisable look. The boy presses too hard and the dough slumps. The master sighs with theatrical suffering, as though this single mistake has ended civilization. It has not, but apprenticeship is partly the art of surviving sighs. The oven is loaded, flames have heated the chamber, embers are raked aside, and loaves slide onto the hot floor. The room fills with that soft, irresistible fragrance that makes legal systems seem briefly unnecessary. Your shoulders relax, the crusts form slowly. Dough becomes bread while officials, guilds, arguments, and punishments wait outside the oven door like less pleasant relatives. By noon, the town is fully awake. Bread moves everywhere to wealthy tables. Workers' hands, taverns, schools, monasteries, hospitals, and market stalls. It feeds the ordinary machinery of urban life. A clerk eats while copying a document. A mason tears bread beside a building site. A widow buys a small loaf and counts her coins twice. A friar receives a donation at a gate. Each act is quiet, but together they make the town breathe. You hold a regulation loaf, still warm, with a crust that crackles softly under your thumb. It smells of wheat, smoke, and public anxiety. When you taste it, the flavour is plain and nourishing, but beneath it you sense the whole system: the guild oath, the town scale, the grain measure, the watched oven, the suspicious customer, the baker rising long before dawn. Medieval bread may look humble on the table, but in town streets it is law, labour, reputation, and trust made edible. And if the loaf is too small, well, the whole town is apparently ready to discuss it. You step into an early modern port city where the air tastes of salt, smoke, and ambition. Masts crowd the harbour like a winter forest stripped of leaves. Ropes creak, gulls scream, barrels roll over wooden planks, and men shout in accents gathered from far coasts. The smell is thick and restless: tar, fish, damp wool, spices, molasses, sweat, old wine, and grain dust spilling from sacks. The world feels wider now, and also sharper. Ships do not merely bring goods, they bring hunger, profit, fashion, violence, and the unsettling habit of calling all of it progress. Bread stands at the centre of this changing world, but its story is now tangled with empire. Wheat fields expand, plantation economies grow, sugar pours into European diets, Atlantic trade reshapes tables and labour systems in ways both dazzling and brutal. A mainstream historical fact belongs clearly here from the 16th century onward. European colonial expansion connected grain, sugar, enslaved labour, shipping, and urban consumption into new global systems of food and power. Bread did not travel alone, it travelled with conquest, markets, and ledgers. You walk through a warehouse where sacks of flour are stacked beside barrels of sugar and crates of spices. The wooden floor is gritty beneath your shoes. Your fingers brush a sugar cone wrapped for sale, hard and pale, expensive enough to impress a guest. Sugar had once been rare in much of Europe, a luxury medicine, spice and status symbol. Now, through plantation labour in the Atlantic world, it becomes more common, though never innocent. It sweetens buns, cakes, biscuits, and enriched breads. It changes what people crave. It teaches the tongue to expect pleasure at a terrible distance from the people who produced it. In a city bakery, early morning heat presses against steamed windows. The baker's table is crowded with doughs of different kinds. One batch is plain and sturdy, meant for labourers. Another is enriched with butter, eggs, milk, sugar, or dried fruit for customers with money. You smell yeast, toasted flour, warm fat, and sweetness. The richer dough feels softer under the hand, smooth and elastic, almost luxurious. It catches the light with a faint shine. This is bread leaning toward cake, and nobody is complaining too loudly. New tastes spread unevenly. Wealthy households enjoy manchette loaves, fine white breads, sweet rolls, spiced cakes, and pastries. Poorer families still rely on coarse bread, rye, barley, oats, peas, or mixed grains depending on region and price. Bread colour remains social language. White bread whispers refinement. Dark bread mutters endurance. Sweet bread announces that someone, somewhere, has access to sugar, butter, and the pleasant confidence of not counting every crumb. You enter a kitchen in a merchant's house. The floor is scrubbed, the hearth bright, the air scented with cinnamon, nutmeg, and orange peel. A cook works dried fruits into dough. Her hands press and fold with calm strength. Outside, carts rattle over stones. Inside, the dough rises under cloth beside the warm hearth. The cloth is soft with use, dusted with flour. When she lifts it, the smell is warm and festive. Rich enough to make ordinary bread seem suddenly underdressed. A quirky tidbit appears in the world of refined bread in some European households. Fine white bread was so prized that serving it could become a display of rank, and stale white bread might be used in elaborate recipes, puddings, sauces, or even as a thickener for delicate dishes. Imagine bread being too fancy to simply eat and be done with it. Humanity can turn anything into etiquette, if given enough table linen. Yet beyond the elegant kitchen, the same expanding world produces ship biscuit, one of the least glamorous breads ever to support history. You step aboard a vessel preparing for a long voyage. The deck smells of tar, bilge water, salted meat, rope, and fear pretending to be discipline. In the hold, hard biscuits are packed in barrels. They are dry, pale, and tough, baked more than once to remove moisture so they will last at sea. You tap one against a plank. It makes a sound disturbingly close to wood. Sailors soak it in water, broth, beer, or whatever liquid will persuade it to become chewable. Ship biscuit feeds naval crews, explorers, merchants, soldiers, and colonists. It also becomes famous for weevils, mould, and general misery. A sailor might break a biscuit in the dim light and inspect it for moving residents. If insects are present, he may eat it anyway, preferably without thinking too much, Protein, after all, has a way of arriving without consent. Bread and flour also travel to colonies, where European settlers try to reproduce familiar diets in unfamiliar climates. Wheat does not grow equally well everywhere. In some regions, maize, cassava, rice, millet, or local tubers become more reliable than wheat. Yet settlers often cling to wheat bread as a sign of identity and superiority. To them, bread can mean home, religion, class, and civilization, a word often used with dangerous arrogance. Local people already have sophisticated foodways, but empire has a talent for mistaking difference for lack. In the Americas, maize becomes central to many colonial diets, joining older indigenous traditions of tortillas, arepas, cornbreads, porridges, and cakes. Enslaved Africans, indigenous communities, and European settlers adapt ingredients under unequal and often violent conditions. Bread broadens in meaning. It may be a wheat loaf in a governor's house, a corn cake at a frontier hearth, cassava bread in the Caribbean, or hard biscuit in a soldier's pack. Grain and starch become markers of culture, survival, and domination. Historians continue to debate how quickly colonial trade transformed ordinary diets in Europe. Some emphasize the growing availability of sugar, coffee, tea, chocolate, and refined wheat goods among urban consumers. Others point out that for many rural and poor people, the diet changed slowly and bread remained coarse, local, and vulnerable to harvest failure. Scholars also argue about how much consumers understood the violence behind plantation sweetness. Some knew more than they admitted, others knew little. Comfort often travels with silence tucked inside it. You walk past a sugar refinery where the air is hot and heavy, sweet enough to cling to your throat. Workers stir, boil, pour, and mould. The sweetness seems almost dreamy until you remember the fields beyond the sea cane cut under brutal conditions. Bodies forced into labour, leaves measured against profit. The sugar entering bread and pastry is not merely flavour, it is history dissolved into dough. In a crowded street, vendors sell buns glistening with glaze, small cakes perfumed with spice, and plain loaves stacked in baskets. A child presses close to a stall, staring at a sweet roll. A dock worker buys coarse bread and onions. A wealthy servant purchases fine loaves for a table he will not sit at. The smells overlap warm sugar, smoke, horse dung, damp stone, sea wind. The city is rich and hungry at once. As evening darkens the harbour, ships creak in their berths, lanterns sway, flour sacks are carried inland, barrels of biscuit are loaded outward. Sugar waits in warehouses, quiet and powerful. Bread has entered a global age, and the loaf in your hand no longer belongs only to one field, one village, or one oven. It carries ocean roots, plantation labour, class desire, military endurance, and the sweetness people learn to crave. You taste a small enriched bun, soft with butter and sugar, and its comfort is real. So is its shadow. The early modern world has taught bread to travel farther, taste sweeter, and remember more than anyone at the table may wish to say aloud. You step into a town where the morning market is open, but the mood has gone thin and brittle. The sky is pale, the air smells of cold stone, chimney smoke, damp wool, and bread that is too expensive for too many hands. You hear carts rolling over uneven paving, a bell ringing from a church tower, and voices sharpened by worry. In the bakery window, loaves sit in careful rows, brown and golden, ordinary in appearance, dangerous in meaning. People look at them the way one might look at locked medicine. This is the world where bread becomes openly political, not symbolically, not politely, not in speeches written by comfortable men after dinner. Political in the stomach, political in the queue, political in the hard mathematics of wages against grain prices. When bread takes most of a family's income, every loaf becomes a referendum on justice. A mainstream historical fact belongs here in early modern Europe. Rising grain prices and bread shortages helped trigger food riots, especially in towns where poor consumers depended on markets rather than their own harvests. You join a line outside a bakery. The stones are slick beneath your shoes. A woman ahead of you holds a child wrapped in a shawl. The child's face is pale, eyes sleepy and too watchful. A labourer shifts his weight from foot to foot, jaw tight. Someone mutters that flour dealers are hoarding. Someone else says bakers are making loaves smaller. A third voice blames the weather, the lord, the merchants, the miller, the tax collector, and perhaps the moon, just to be thorough. Hunger rarely produces elegant analysis, but it has excellent aim. Inside the bakery, the baker is not necessarily a villain. He is also trapped between high grain costs, official price controls, fuel expenses, customers' anger, and the possibility of punishment if his loaves are judged unfair. His face is grey with lack of sleep. Flour dust clings to his arms. The oven heat glows behind him, smelling of toasted wheat and ash. That smell should comfort you. Instead, it makes the crowd restless. Warm bread is hardest to smell when you cannot afford it. Food riots often follow a pattern scholars call the moral economy, a term used to describe the popular belief that authorities and sellers have obligations to keep essential food fair and available. People do not always riot because they reject order. Sometimes they riot because they believe proper order has been broken. They may seize grain, force sales at what they consider a just price, stop carts from leaving town, or demand action from officials. It is not always chaos. It can be rough, emotional, and even strangely organised. Humanity can be furious and bureaucratic at the same time, which is quite a combination. You hear a shout from the end of the street. A cart loaded with grain sacks is trying to pass toward the gate. The line dissolves. Feet slap against mud. Your shoulder is bumped hard. The crowd moves. Not yet a mob, not quite a delegation, but something in between. The cart driver raises his hands and swears he's only following orders. The sacks smell dry and dusty, precious as treasure. Women press forward. Men grip the cart wheels. Someone cuts a rope. Grain spills in a pale rush onto the street. The sound changes. It becomes a roar, then a scramble, then a series of commands. Measure it fairly. Sell it here. Call the magistrate. A woman kneels to scoop grain into her apron. Her fingers tremble. Nearby, a child laughs because grain is falling like strange snow, and for 1 second the scene looks almost festive. It is not festive. It is desperation wearing movement. A quirky tidbit appears in many food protests women often played visible, and sometimes leading roles in bread riots. Authorities and observers frequently described women confronting bakers, blocking grain shipments, or demanding fair prices. This was not because women were naturally more dramatic, despite what lazy old commentators might imply. Women were often responsible for feeding households, buying bread, managing small budgets, and facing children's hunger directly. If the loaf shrank, they knew first. If the pot was empty, they heard it loudest. You follow the crowd to the town square, where officials gather with stiff faces. A magistrate attempts calm. His cloak is fine, his boots clean, his voice trained for authority. The crowd answers with raised arms, complaints, and loaves held up as evidence. One loaf is sliced open to show its coarse, dark, poor quality interior. Another is weighed against an official measure. The scale creaks. Everyone leans closer. It is amazing how suspenseful bread can become when trust has vanished. Historians still argue whether food riots should be understood mainly as spontaneous hunger protests or as disciplined actions rooted in shared expectations about fairness. Some emphasize poverty, panic, and harvest failure. Others stress that crowds often followed recognizable customs, targeting specific offenders and appealing to older rights or communal justice. The truth varies by place and moment. A starving crowd can be impulsive. A wronged community can be strategic. Sometimes it is both by lunchtime. The atmosphere thickens as soldiers or town guards arrive. Their boots strike the paving stones in a slow, heavy rhythm. Metal buckles clink. The smell of sweat and wet leather mixes with bread and spilled grain. Nobody wants bloodshed, at least nobody sensible, but hunger reduces the space where patience can stand. A baker's sign swings overhead in the wind, creaking softly, absurdly normal. Food crises can begin far from the bakery. Bad weather damages crops, war interrupts transport, currency changes disturb markets, speculators buy grain and wait for prices to rise, governments impose controls too late or too clumsily, roads fail, rivers freeze. The poor suffer first because they spend the greatest share of income on bread. For wealthier households, bread dearer by a little is irritating. For the poor, it is the difference between supper and silence. You step into a narrow lane where a family divides a loaf at a table. The room is cold, lit by a weak fire. The bread is dark, coarse, and cut thin. Each piece is counted. The knife against the board sounds loud. There is no dramatic speech, only careful distribution. The youngest receives a bit soaked in broth. The mother pretends not to want more. The father stares at his hands. Hunger has many sounds, and one of them is politeness. Outside, the protest continues in waves. The magistrate orders grain sold at a lower price to calm the town. Perhaps he promises an investigation. Perhaps he blames outsiders. Perhaps he quietly sends word to higher authorities that the situation is under control, which is what officials often say when control is exactly the question. The crowd begins to loosen. Some people carry grain home. Some remain angry. The market does not return to normal, because normal has cracked. Bread riots are not failed revolutions, and they are not merely background noise. They teach rulers that food supply is a form of legitimacy. They teach communities that hunger can become a voice. They reveal how deeply ordinary people understand the politics of daily life. A loaf is not abstract theory. It is rent, wage, labour, weather, trade, law, and survival compressed into something you can tear with your fingers. Evening falls and the street smells of trampled grain, smoke, mud, and a few loaves cooling behind guarded doors. The crowd has thinned, leaving scattered husks in the gutters. You pick up a broken piece of bread from a table where people gathered hours earlier. It is cold now, hard at the edge, sour on the tongue. Yet it carries the heat of the day-raised voices, measured loaves, frightened officials, angry mothers, dusty grain spilled onto stone. You stand beneath the darkening sky and feel how bread can shift from comfort to demand. When it is plentiful, people bless it and pass it quietly. When it is scarce or unfairly priced, it becomes accusation. It asks who has stored too much, who has paid too little, who has watched hunger grow and called it unfortunate. The loaf in your hand is small, but the question inside it is enormous. How long will people wait when the oven is warm, the shelves are full, and their children are hungry? You enter Paris in the uneasy light of a summer morning, where the streets are narrow, the gutters damp, and the air smells of smoke, horses, old stone, river mist, and bread that everyone is thinking about. The city is awake before it is ready. Shutters open, carts rattle over cobbles, church bells mark the hour with slow, serious notes. In the bakery lines, people stand close together, shoulders wrapped in worn shawls and coats, faces turned toward the door as if the oven inside might deliver mercy. The year is 1789, and bread is no longer only food. It is the measure of the whole kingdom's failure. In Paris and across France, ordinary people depend heavily on bread for daily calories, and the price of a loaf can decide whether a family eats enough. A mainstream historical fact sits at the centre of this tense street. Poor harvests in the late 1780s, rising bread prices, and economic strain helped create the conditions for the French Revolution. Philosophy may sharpen ideas, pamphlets may spread anger, and assemblies may debate rights. But hunger gives politics a body. You stand in a queue outside a bakery as the smell of fresh loaves slips through the doorway. It is warm, sweet, and almost cruel. A woman ahead of you counts coins in her palm, rubbing them with her thumb as though a little friction might turn them into more. Behind you, a man mutters that wages have not kept up with prices. Another says grain merchants are hiding supplies. Someone whispers about the king. Someone else whispers about the queen. Rumour travels faster than carts, and with fewer repairs. Inside the bakery, the oven glows red. The baker moves quickly, face damp with sweat and sleeplessness. He is watched from all sides. His flour must be stretched, his loaves weighed, his prices judged, his motives suspected. Flour dust floats in the warm air. The crust crackle as they cool. The bread looks simple and beautiful, which somehow makes the tension worse. When food is ugly, people may resent it. When it is beautiful and out of reach, they resent the world. French bread in this period varies by region and class. Wealthier households can buy finer white bread, while many poor families eat darker, coarser loaves made from mixed grains. In Paris, the demand for affordable bread is fierce. Bread may consume a huge portion of a worker's income during crises. You can feel that number without writing it down. It is in the way people stare at the shelves. It is in the silence when a loaf is smaller than expected. A quirky tidbit floats through the Parisian air like flour dust. The famous line, "Let them eat cake," was almost certainly not said by Marie Antoinette. Versions of the story existed before she became queen, and historians generally treat the attribution as a later symbol of aristocratic indifference rather than a reliable quote. Still, the myth survived because it felt emotionally true to many people. That is the dangerous thing about a good rumour. It does not need a birth certificate, it only needs hunger and someone to blame. You leave the bakery line and walk toward the markets. Stalls overflow with noise but not reassurance. Fishwives shout prices. Porters carry baskets. Chickens complain from cages, which is fair, given their situation. The smell of cheese, fish, cabbage, wine, and unwashed humanity mingles with the sharper scent of anger. People speak of the Estates General, the king's weakness, taxes, bread shortages, hoarding, soldiers, and strange hopes that sound too large for the street but somehow belong there. The political crisis grows from many roots. France is burdened by debt. The tax system is unequal. Bad harvests intensify suffering. Enlightenment ideas challenge old authority. The monarchy hesitates, misjudges, and loses trust. Yet for many people, the daily question is brutally plain: how much bread can you buy today? A constitution is important. Representation is important. But a child cannot chew representation. Rights must eventually meet the table. You hear news ripple through the crowd. The Bastille has fallen. The fortress prison, symbol of royal authority, has been stormed on July 14th, 1789. The sound that follows is not one sound, but many: shock, disbelief, triumph, fear, laughter, prayer, and the sudden realization that something impossible has become real. Bread is not the only cause of this event. Of course, weapons, politics, royal troops, urban fear, and revolutionary organization all matter. But hunger has prepared the city to move. Historians still argue how central bread prices were to the outbreak of the French Revolution, compared with political ideology, fiscal collapse, and elite conflict. Some scholars emphasize the material crisis, the stomach-level emergency that made ordinary people desperate and suspicious. Others stress the importance of political culture, public opinion, and the breakdown of royal legitimacy. The answer is not tidy. Bread did not write the Declaration of the Rights of Man, but hunger helped push people into streets where such ideas became urgent. Months later, You find yourself among thousands of women walking from Paris to Versailles in October rain. Their skirts are damp, their shoes slap through mud. Some carry pikes, sticks, or kitchen knives. Others carry empty baskets and fury. The air smells of wet wool, cold breath, mud, and determination. They are marching to demand bread and to bring the royal family closer to the capital. The rhythm of their steps is heavy and relentless. Hunger is walking now. The march is not a delicate procession. It is noisy, chaotic, frightening, and purposeful. Women shout for bread, men join, National Guardsmen follow. At Versailles, gilded halls meet muddy feet. That contrast is almost too obvious. But history sometimes writes with a thick brush. Marble, mirrors, silk, and chandeliers stand against rain-soaked bodies demanding food. The palace smells of wax and perfume. Outside, the crowd smells of weather and want. You imagine the royal family hearing the noise. For them, bread is policy, image, supply, a crisis to manage. For the crowd, it is breakfast, supper, survival. That gap is where revolutions widen, when rulers speak in abstractions and people answer with empty baskets. The conversation has already become dangerous. The next morning, the king and queen are brought to Paris. Crowds accompany them. Some say they bring the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's boy, a bitter joke that turns the royal family into symbols of bread supply. It is sharp, theatrical, and very French in the sense that even political fury arrives with phrasing. The monarchy is not yet gone, but it is no longer distant. Hunger has helped pull it into the city. You stand again near a Paris bakery at dusk. The line remains, the oven remains, the people remain. But the air has changed. Something once unthinkable has cracked open. Bread has become a language of rights, accountability, and public anger. Each loaf carries the question of who governs, who pays, who eats, and who waits. The crust in your hand is warm, but the street around you is restless. You tear a piece slowly. It tastes of wheat, smoke, and worry. Somewhere, pamphlets are being printed. Somewhere, assemblies are arguing. Somewhere, flour is being measured under suspicious eyes. The French loaf is not the revolution by itself, but it is there at every turn, plain and powerful, feeding bodies that refuse to stay silent. You step into the 19th century, and the first thing you notice is the noise, not the soft rasp of a handstone, not the patient creak of a village mill wheel, but a roar made of belts, gears, rollers, steam, iron, and ambition. The building trembles under your feet. The air smells of hot metal, grain dust, oil, damp brick, coal smoke, and flour so fine it seems to float like pale fog. You breathe carefully. Too much of this softness in the lungs is not comforting at all. Industrial progress, as usual, arrives with both marvels and coughing. The old mill has changed. Grain no longer simply passes between rough stones in the familiar way. New machines clean, sort, break, sift, and reduce wheat with increasing precision. A mainstream historical fact belongs here in the late 19th century. Steel roller milling transformed flour production by making it easier to separate bran and germ from the starchy endosperm, producing whiter, finer flour on a much larger scale. This flour keeps longer than whole grain flour because the oily germ, which can spoil, has been removed. It is beautiful, pale, profitable, and nutritionally a bit suspicious, but we will let it stand there looking innocent for now. You watch wheat pour through machinery in a continuous stream. It rattles down chutes, disappears into rollers, emerges as fragments, then travels again to sieves and purifiers. The whole system seems to swallow grain and exhale whiteness. Workers move around it with practiced caution. Their clothes are dusted pale, their hands are rough, their ears are battered by sound. the flour settles on eyelashes, collars, boots, and beams. It softens everything visually, even the hard edges of iron. Like winter has entered the mill and decided to become edible. White bread has long carried status in many societies, but industrial milling brings it within reach of more people in new ways. In cities, factory-made flour moves by rail and canal, arriving in sacks marked with brands. Wheat from vast fields can be milled far from where it grew. Railroads link farms, mills, ports, and urban bakeries. Grain becomes part of a faster national and international market. Bread now depends not only on fields and ovens, but on locomotives, elevators, steamships, warehouses, and price reports. A loaf may look calm on the table, but behind it is an entire system running at unreasonable speed. You leave the mill and enter a city bakery where the atmosphere is warmer, sweeter, and still industrial in its own way. The bakery is no longer just a small neighbourhood shop. Larger establishments mix dough in mechanical troughs, divide it by machine, and bake in ovens designed for volume. The dough rises in rows, pale and swelling beneath cloths. It smells yeasty, clean, and slightly sweet. Your fingertips press into a piece, and it springs back with obedient softness. This is bread being disciplined into consistency. Customers begin to expect that consistency. A loaf should be pale, light, predictable, and easy to slice. Urban workers need affordable food that can be bought quickly. Families living in crowded housing may have little space or fuel for baking at home. Store-bought bread becomes more common. The baker's craft does not disappear, but it becomes entangled with factories, brands, delivery routes, and competition. The question is not only who bakes well, it is who can bake enough, cheaply enough, and deliver before the morning meal. A quirky tidbit hides in the world of flour whiteness. Some millers and bakers experimented with bleaching or improving flour to make it look even paler and perform more predictably. Later, chemical treatments became controversial, with critics worrying about purity, nutrition, and honesty. Bread had entered the age of looking good under inspection, which is relatable but not always healthy. A loaf could become a kind of edible public relations project, soft, white, reassuring, and quietly altered behind the scenes. You walk through a working-class street at dusk. Smoke hangs low between brick buildings. Children chase one another past a bakery cart. A woman buys a loaf wrapped in paper and presses it under her arm while holding a smaller child by the hand. The bread is softer than the dark loaves of many rural tables, and it seems almost luxurious. Yet the city around it is hard. Factory whistles govern time. Wages are uncertain. Rent is due. The loaf is comfort, but also a product of the same industrial world that wears people down. Industrial bread changes texture. The crust grows thinner in many urban loaves. The crumb becomes lighter, more even, less demanding to chew. For those with bad teeth, children, and people tired from labour, softness has real appeal. It is easy to mock pale bread from a comfortable distance, but comfort often has a reason. A soft white slice may lack the deep flavour of a slow sour rye or hearth loaf, but it offers convenience, mildness, and a small feeling of modern ease. Not every tired person wants a philosophical crust. Still, debates begin to sharpen. Reformers, doctors, and food critics argue about the health of refined flour. Removing bran and germ removes fibre, oils, and nutrients. Some people praise white bread as clean and civilized. Others worry it is less nourishing than darker breads. Historians still argue whether the spread of refined white bread should be understood mainly as democratic access to a former luxury, as industrial loss of nutritional quality, or as both at once. The answer depends on where you stand in the mill owner's office, the worker's kitchen, the doctor's clinic, or the hungry child's chair. The industrial age also changes the farmer's world. Wheat varieties are selected for yield, milling quality, and market demand. Vast grain belts expand in North America, Russia, Australia, and elsewhere, supplying growing urban populations. Grain elevators rise like blunt towers against flat horizons. In prairie towns, wheat is weighed, graded, stored, and shipped in quantities that would astonish many earlier communities. Bread's geography stretches wide. The loaf on a city table may contain sunlight from a field hundreds or thousands of miles away. You stand near a railway platform as sacks of flour are loaded into wagons. Steam hisses. Coal smoke drifts across the station. The platform boards vibrate beneath your feet. A porter wipes his forehead with a sleeve, leaving a white streak of flour across his brow. The scene smells of soot and grain, an odd marriage of field and machine. This is modern bread's new scent wheat married to industry, with coal as an uninvited but powerful guest. Night falls over the city, and electric lights begin to glow in some streets, while gas lamps flicker in others. Behind bakery windows, loaves cool in orderly ranks. Their crusts are pale gold. Their shape is uniform. They look calm, almost sleepy. Yet they contain a revolution of rollers, rails, factories, chemistry, advertising, nutrition debates, and changing taste. You take a slice from a fresh white loaf. It is soft under your fingers, almost tender enough to dent with a breath. It smells mild, warm, and faintly sweet. When you bite, it offers little resistance. It is not the bread of stone dust and smoky hearths. It is bread shaped by machines, markets, and the desire for ease. In its softness, you feel the modern world arriving quietly at the table, wearing flour on its cuffs and promising that tomorrow's loaf will look exactly like today's. You stand in a city under wartime light, where windows are shaded, streets are quieter than they should be, and every ordinary smell seems more precious. The air carries coal smoke, damp pavement, boiled cabbage, wool coats, and bread stretched thin by necessity. Somewhere in the distance a siren has recently faded, leaving behind a silence that feels alert rather than peaceful. People move with baskets tucked close to their sides. They do not stroll. They measure their errands. They count. War changes bread because war changes everything. Grain needs fields, workers, transport, fuel, ships, mills, prices, and trust. A loaf depends on peace more than it admits. When armies march, farms lose hands. When navies blockade, grain cannot arrive. When railways fill with troops and weapons, flour waits. When fuel is rationed, ovens burn less freely. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. During the First and Second World Wars, many countries introduced bread rationing, flour controls, substitute grains, and public campaigns to conserve wheat and maintain civilian morale. You enter a bakery where the shelves are not empty, but they are not generous either. The loaves are darker than many customers remember from easier years. Flour has been stretched with barley, rye, oats, potatoes, cornmeal, or other substitutes depending on place and moment. The bread smells earthy, faintly sour, and less sweet than a fine white loaf. It is still warm, and warmth is doing a great deal of emotional work. The baker cuts ration portions with careful hands. Behind the counter, a sign reminds customers of limits. Nobody loves the sign. Everyone reads it. The queue moves slowly. Coupons are unfolded, checked, and torn. The paper feels thin and official between your fingers. A woman keeps hers in a small envelope, smoothed flat from being handled too often. A child asks whether there will be jam. The mother says, "Not today," gently enough that it hurts. The bakery window fogs from breath and oven heat. Outside, boots scrape on the pavement. Inside, the scent of bread presses against hunger like a promise that has been reduced but not broken. In wartime Britain, the government promoted the national loaf during the Second World War. a wholemeal bread made from flour extracted more fully from the grain than refined white flour. It was introduced to conserve wheat and improve nutrition, though many people complained about its coarse texture and greyish appearance. It was healthier than some expected, but not glamorous. The loaf had the noble personality of a sensible shoe. You may respect it deeply while not dreaming of it with butter. You take a slice, it feels firm and slightly damp. The crumb is grey-brown, close-textured, and heavy in the hand. It tastes nutty, plain, and faintly bitter from bran. With a scrape of margarine, it becomes better. With a spoonful of soup, it becomes dinner. That is the wartime genius of bread. It does not need luxury to matter. It stands beside thin stew, powdered eggs, cabbage, beans, or cheese, quietly making the plate seem less lonely. A quirky wartime tidbit rises from the home front governments, and newspapers offered recipes for breads and cakes that used very little fat, sugar, or eggs, producing creations with names that sounded more cheerful than their textures deserved. Potato bread, carrot buns, victory loaves, eggless cakes. Some were clever. Some were heroic in the sense that eating them required courage. Yet people saved crumbs, reused stale slices, and learned to toast, soak, fry, or pudding almost anything. Waste became shameful. Ingenuity became domestic patriotism. You walk into a kitchen where blackout curtains turn afternoon into dusk. The table is scrubbed pale. A loaf rests beneath a cloth, guarded almost like a sleeping infant. The room smells of boiled potatoes, tea, coal dust, and yeast. A woman mixes flour with mashed potato to make dough go farther. Her hands press and fold slowly. The dough feels softer than expected, slightly tacky from the potato. The child beside her watches with solemn interest. Because food preparation has become a lesson in arithmetic. How much flour? How many coupons? How many mouths? How many days? Bread also goes to soldiers, in trenches, barracks, field kitchens, ships, and camps. Bread appears as loaves, biscuits, crackers, or hard rations. The conditions are rarely charming. Imagine damp bread wrapped in cloth, carried through mud, smelling of smoke, wool, and metal. Imagine hard biscuits so tough it seems personally opposed to your teeth. Yet to a soldier, bread can mean normal life reaching across chaos. A slice with tea, a biscuit softened in stew, a ration shared with a friend. Small comforts become large when the world is loud with danger. The First World War brings its own bread hardships. Submarine warfare threatens shipping. Wheat supplies tighten. In Germany and Austria-Hungary, shortages become severe, and bread is mixed with substitutes, sometimes earning grim nicknames. Civilians stand in long lines while official promises weaken. Hunger erodes morale. The home front and battlefront are connected by grain. A government may speak of honour and victory, but the stomach listens for something simpler. Historians still debate how much food shortages determined wartime morale compared with military losses, political leadership, propaganda, and social inequality. Some scholars emphasise that bread queues and rationing revealed whether citizens believed sacrifice was shared fairly. Others argue that people endured severe shortages when they trusted the cause or feared the enemy more. The evidence varies by country and class. Bread did not single-handedly win or lose wars, but it measured the strain in a language everyone understood. You step into an occupied city where the mood is colder. Bread cards become instruments of control. Supply can reward obedience or punish resistance. Black markets thrive in shadows. A loaf sold secretly may cost more than a worker can spare. People trade jewellery, linen, favours, and family treasures for flour. The smell of bread from a hidden oven can be comforting and frightening at the same time. In a crisis, even warmth must keep its voice low. Not all wartime bread is scarce in the same way. In some regions, farmers can still bake from their own grain. In others, cities depend entirely on distribution networks. Soldiers may receive more reliable rations than civilians, or the reverse, depending on policy and collapse. The war loaf has many faces: dark government bread, army biscuit, cornbread, potato bread, sourdough from a rural kitchen, stale crust hidden in a pocket for later. Each tells a different story of survival. You hear an air raid warning at night. People move towards shelters, carrying blankets, water and small parcels of food. Someone brings bread wrapped in cloth, underground. The air smells of dust, damp concrete, fear, and tea from a thermos. The bread is passed quietly. Its crust is chewy, its crumb dry. But it gives the hands something to do, and the mouth something familiar. Above, the city waits under danger. Below, people chew slowly in the dimness and pretend, for a few minutes, that breakfast will happen. After the siren clears, dawn arrives pale and tired. The bakery opens again, the queue forms again. This repetition matters. Bread in wartime is not only nutrition, it is proof that life continues, that someone milled flour, heated an oven, printed ration cards, drove a delivery cart, kept records, and woke early despite fear. Each loaf says the system is not yet broken. Each missing loaf says something else. You hold the day's ration in both hands. It is not elegant. It is darker than memory, smaller than desire, and rough against your palms. But it is warm. Steam rises faintly when you tear it open. The smell is grain, yeast, and endurance. Around you, the city breathes beneath wartime rules, tired but not silent. Bread has become morale you can chew, scarcity you can count, and resilience you can pass across a table. In its plain slice lives the hope that tomorrow, somehow, the oven will be lit again. You enter the 20th century through a kitchen bright with morning light, chrome edges, tiled counters, and the soft hum of appliances that would have seemed like magic to most of humanity. A radio murmurs from a shelf. A kettle begins to tremble. Outside, cars pass on wet pavement with a hiss like distant rain. The air smells of coffee, soap, butter warming in a pan, and packaged bread released from its wrapper with a faint sweet scent of yeast, flour, and softness. On the table sits a loaf already sliced. This small convenience feels so ordinary that it nearly disappears, yet it changes the way people eat. Each piece is even, pale, square, ready for toast. Sandwiches, lunch boxes, diners, picnics, school cafeterias, and late-night snacks eaten while standing in the kitchen pretending this is not a meal. Bread has become fast, neat, and predictable. It fits the rhythm of clocks, factories, offices, cars, and children who need to leave for school right now. Not in a reflective historical minute. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Commercially sliced bread became popular in the United States after mechanical bread slicing and wrapping machines were introduced in the late 1920s. The idea spread because sliced bread was convenient, hygienically packaged, and easy to use. People quickly grew used to it. Once a loaf arrives pre-cut, the household bread knife loses a little of its daily authority. The sandwich gains power, toast becomes automatic, breakfast becomes more standardized, which is both helpful and faintly suspicious, like a polite little assembly line on your plate. You touch a slice between your fingers. It is soft, springy, and almost weightless compared with older dense loaves. The crust is thin and brown, more a border than a challenge. The crumb compresses if you press it, then slowly rises again, as if trying to maintain optimism. It smells mild and sweet. When toasted, it browns evenly and releases a warmer aroma, simple and comforting. The smell of countless mornings where people are too sleepy to make grand culinary decisions. Packaging matters almost as much as slicing. Wrapped bread stays cleaner and softer longer. Brands promise freshness, purity, nutrition, and modern family care. A printed logo on a plastic or waxed paper wrapper becomes a signal of trust. You see advertisements showing smiling mothers, sturdy children, and loaves so white they seem personally committed to cleanliness. The message is clear: buy this bread, and your home will be healthy, efficient, and possibly filled with children who never complain. Advertising has always had a charming imagination. In a suburban kitchen, a parent spreads peanut butter across one slice and jelly across another. The knife scrapes softly. The bread yields without tearing. The sandwich is pressed together, cut diagonally, and slipped into waxed paper. It is lunch engineered for portability. Bread now carries fillings into schools, factories, offices, trains, parks, and battlefields of minor domestic negotiation. Ham, cheese, egg salad, cucumber, tuna, jam, banana, tomato, leftovers. Mystery spreads from the back of the refrigerator. The sliced loaf accepts nearly everything with a patience bordering on saintly. A quirky tidbit from the age of sliced bread is the phrase "the best thing since sliced bread." It became a cultural shorthand for modern convenience. Even though people had lived for thousands of years slicing their own bread without collapsing as a species, still, the phrase captures the excitement of the period. A machine had taken a daily task and made it invisible. That is how convenience often wins, not by feeling dramatic, but by quietly removing one small effort until nobody wants it back. You move through a grocery store aisle where bread is stacked in tall soft walls: white bread, wheat bread, raisin bread, sandwich rolls, hot dog buns, hamburger buns, dinner rolls, sweet buns, diet bread, vitamin-enriched bread, bread promising fiber, bread promising fewer calories, bread promising a wholesome family glow if you read the label with enough trust. The aisle smells faintly sweet and yeasty beneath the sharper scent of floor cleaner. Fluorescent lights shine on plastic bags. Bread has become abundance arranged by brand. Industrial baking reaches enormous scale. Dough conditioners, controlled fermentation, high-speed mixers, preservatives, fortified flour, and standardized ovens help produce loaves that remain soft and consistent. In many countries, governments require or encourage enrichment of flour with nutrients such as iron and B vitamins, especially after concerns about deficiencies linked to refined flour. Here is bread as public health instrument. Not romantic, perhaps, but important. A slice can carry policy along with butter. Yet the softness of packaged bread also draws criticism. Food writers, nutritionists, and traditional bakers complain that mass bread lacks flavour, texture, and soul. They call it cottony, bland, over-processed. Some are a little dramatic, but not entirely wrong. When speed and shelf life become priorities, long fermentation and grain complexity often fade. The loaf becomes reliable, but less expressive. It does not tell you much about the field, the mill, or the baker. It tells you that the factory is functioning and the wrapper is sealed. Historians still debate how to judge the rise of mass-produced bread. Some see it as a triumph of affordability, sanitation, convenience, and food access for busy modern households. Others see it as part of a broader industrial diet that distanced people from craft, local grain, and richer nutrition. Both views can sit at the same table, perhaps awkwardly, like relatives at a holiday meal. For many families, packaged bread was liberation from labour. For many critics, it was a loss disguised as softness. You step into a school cafeteria. The sound is bright and chaotic, trays sliding, chairs scraping, children talking over one another, milk cartons opening with tiny cardboard sighs. Sandwiches appear everywhere. Bread holds bologna, cheese, egg, peanut butter, jam, or whatever the budget allows. Its softness makes it easy for small mouths and rushed schedules. It feeds the mid-century imagination of order lunch portioned, wrapped, and carried from home in a metal box decorated with heroes, cartoons, or animals who look much happier than the vegetables. In diners, bread becomes toast beside eggs, buns around burgers, slices under gravy, triangles beside soup. In military canteens, bread supports quick calories. In airlines, it appears in wrapped rolls with chilled butter so firm it could defend itself in court. In offices, sandwiches let workers eat without leaving their desks for long. Bread becomes part of modern time discipline. The lunch hour shrinks, and the sandwich adapts, politely enabling the problem. Television adds another layer. Commercials show bread as family love, childhood growth, and national normality. A loaf on the counter becomes a symbol of domestic success. The bread is always fresh, the kitchen always clean, the children always grateful, which is how you know it is advertising and not documentary evidence. Still, these images shape desire. People learn what bread should look like: soft, pale, uniform, safe. But outside the packaged loaf, other bread traditions continue. Immigrant neighborhoods keep baking rye, challah, pita, tortillas, baguettes, pan dulce, steamed buns, lavash, injera, and countless other forms. The 20th century does not erase variety. It simply places industrial sliced bread at the center of a powerful commercial stage. Around it, older and newer breads keep living, adapting, and feeding communities in languages of taste that no supermarket jingle can fully translate. You toast a slice at night. The kitchen is quiet now. The radio is off. Rain taps softly against the window. The toaster clicks, then releases 2 brown squares with a small metallic jump. Butter melts quickly, shining into the surface. When you bite, it crackles at the edge and turns soft beneath your tongue. It is simple, comforting, and modern in the gentlest possible way. This bread may not carry the drama of riot or the depth of an ancient hearth, but it carries a different story: convenience, advertising, public health, speed, childhood, lunch boxes, supermarkets, and the strange comfort of sameness. The sliced loaf becomes soft power at the table. It shapes habits not by command, but by being ready, waiting, and easy to use. In the quiet kitchen, with toast warming your hands, you feel how bread has learned to fit the modern day, one even slice at a time. You enter a modern bakery before sunrise, when the street outside is still blue and quiet, and the windows glow with a warm amber light. Inside, the air is fragrant with flour, roasted grain, sourdough starter, coffee, and the faint sweetness of butter waiting its turn. The floor is dusted pale beneath your shoes. Metal racks stand in rows, baskets lined with linen hold resting doughs, their surfaces gently domed, lightly floured, and quiet in the way sleeping things are quiet. The sound is calmer than the industrial roar, but not silent. You hear a mixer turning slowly, the soft slap of dough on a wooden bench, the hiss of steam entering an oven, the crackle of crusts as loaves cool. A baker moves with deliberate care, scoring each loaf with a blade. The cuts are swift and clean, little openings for expansion, little signatures made before heat does its work. The room feels both ancient and modern, full of stainless steel and old instincts. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Late 20th and early 21st century bread culture saw a strong revival of interest in artisan baking, sourdough fermentation, whole grains, local flour, and traditional methods. This did not replace packaged bread. Of course, supermarket shelves remain very much alive and emotionally committed to softness, but a growing number of bakers and eaters began asking different questions. Where did the grain come from? How was it milled? How long did the dough ferment? Why does this crust sound like a tiny fireplace when you squeeze it? You stand near a table where whole wheat flour has been poured into a wide bowl. It is not pure white, but warm beige, flecked with bran and germ. When you touch it, it feels silkier than you expect, but textured, alive with tiny rough particles. It smells grassy, nutty, and faintly sweet. This flour contains more of the grain than refined white flour, including fiber, oils, vitamins, minerals, and flavor compounds. It also behaves differently in dough. It absorbs more water, ferments actively, and can produce loaves that are dense if handled badly and magnificent if understood. The baker mixes flour, water, salt, and starter. The starter is a bubbling culture of wild yeasts and lactic acid bacteria kept alive through feeding. It smells sour, fruity, creamy, and slightly strange, like yogurt and apples having a private conversation. You watch it folded into the dough. No packet of commercial yeast is needed here, though plenty of good bread uses commercial yeast without shame. Sourdough asks for time. It rises slowly, develops acidity, strengthens flavour, and turns the bakery schedule into a relationship rather than a command. A quirky tidbit from modern sourdough culture is that some people name their starters. They call them things like bread pit, Clint Yeastwood, dough laws, or mother, depending on personality and level of sleep deprivation. A jar of fermenting flour and water can become a household pet that never needs walking but does demand feeding. Slightly ridiculous. Yes, also strangely charming. Humans will form emotional bonds with anything that bubbles loyally on a counter. You follow the process through the morning. The dough rests. Then it is folded, rested again, divided, shaped, placed into baskets. Each step has touch at its centre. The baker presses gently, not too much, just enough to create tension on the surface. The dough feels cool, elastic, and slightly sticky. It resists, then yields. This is skill measured in fingertips. Machines can mix and divide, but the artisan baker listens with the hands. The revival of whole grains also brings older grains back into view, spelt einkorn, emmer, rye, barley, oats, buckwheat, millet, and regional wheats with names that sound like they should belong to quiet villages or retired professors. Farmers, millers, and bakers begin collaborating in new ways. Some stone mills return to use, producing fresh flour that tastes more vivid but spoil faster. Local grain economies emerge in pockets, reconnecting bread to place. A loaf may now announce the farm, the mill, the wheat variety, and the fermentation time, which is lovely, though sometimes the label becomes longer than a medieval charter. You step into a farmer's market where loaves sit on wooden boards beneath linen cloths. The morning air smells of rain, apples, wet canvas, roasted coffee, and crust. People lift loaves and listen to them crackle. They ask about hydration, starter age, sifted flour, heritage wheat, and whether the bread is naturally leavened. Not every question is necessary, but curiosity is a good sign. Bread has stopped being invisible for a moment. It has become a conversation. Still, this revival is not simple. Artisan bread can be expensive. A slow-fermented whole-grain loaf may cost far more than a supermarket loaf. The reasons are real better grain, small-scale milling, hand labour, long fermentation, rent, wages, waste, and skill. But the price means that access is unequal. Bread once associated with poverty, dark, dense, coarse, can return as a luxury object wrapped in brown paper and moral satisfaction. History has a dry sense of humour. Historians and food scholars still debate whether the artisan bread movement is mainly a genuine return to better food systems, or partly a lifestyle trend shaped by nostalgia and status. Some emphasise nutrition, flavour, local agriculture, and craft knowledge. Others warn that romanticising the past ignores hard labour, scarcity, and the fact that many people chose soft white bread because it was convenient, affordable, and pleasant. Both arguments matter, A crusty loaf can be delicious without needing to pretend every old oven was paradise. You taste a slice of whole grain sourdough. The crust is dark, blistered, and crisp enough to send tiny flakes onto the table. The crumb is open but moist, speckled with bran, with a slight shine in the holes. It smells of toasted nuts, malt, earth, and tang. The first bite is chewy, then sourness arrives, followed by sweetness, then a long roasted finish. Butter melts into it slowly. It feels like bread asking to be noticed. Nutrition debates gather around the table. Whole grains are often recommended because they provide more fibre and nutrients than refined grains, and diets including whole grains are associated with health benefits. Yet bread also becomes tangled in modern anxieties about carbohydrates, gluten, blood sugar, weight, and wellness culture. Some people avoid bread entirely. Others seek gluten-free breads because of celiac disease or sensitivity. Some simply follow trends. Bread, once the unquestioned centre of the meal, now sits under interrogation like a suspect with excellent aroma. In another kitchen, someone bakes during a quiet weekend. The room smells of flour and anticipation. A bowl sits on the counter, covered with a towel. The dough rises slowly while rain slides down the window. The baker is not professional. The loaf may spread too wide, scorch at the bottom, or emerge with one dramatic burst on the side like it tried to escape. But when it is cut, steam rises, and the pleasure is real. Making bread at home offers a kind of calm that modern life often misplaces. Measure, mix, wait, fold, wait, bake. The pace is almost rebellious. During moments of social stress, people often return to bread making because it makes uncertainty tangible and manageable. Flour, water, and time become something warm. The smell of a loaf in the oven can change the atmosphere of a room. It can make a small apartment feel anchored. It can turn anxiety into a crust, which is not a cure, but is certainly more useful than staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. and arguing with your own thoughts. You stand again in the bakery as the loaves come out. Steam bursts from the oven. The crust sings softly, tiny crackles that fill the room like distant rain on dry leaves. The baker places them on racks, and heat rises into your face. Your hand hovers near one loaf, not touching yet, because it is too hot and because reverence sometimes looks exactly like patience. Whole grains have returned not as a complete escape from modernity, but as a reminder, bread can be fast, soft, cheap, and useful. It can also be slow, rough, local, and complex. Neither version tells the whole story alone. In the loaf before you, the grain is visible again. The farmer, miller, baker, microbes, and eater all seem closer together. You breathe in the warm, sour aroma and feel that bread, even now, still knows how to renew itself. It does not go backward. It rises again in a different shape. You hold a loaf in your hands, and for a moment the whole room becomes quiet around it. The crust is warm, rough, and lightly blistered. It presses into your palms with a familiar weight, not heavy enough to burden you, but solid enough to matter. The smell rises slowly toasted grain, yeast, salt, faint sourness, and the soft sweetness that only heat can coax from flour. Outside, the world may be loud, clever, restless, and overcomplicated. In your hands, bread remains beautifully direct. It asks only to be broken, shared, and eaten. You sit at a table that could belong almost anywhere. A wooden table in a village kitchen, a marble counter in a city apartment, a woven mat beneath a desert awning, a stall at a crowded market, a bench near a factory gate, a family table at dawn. Bread has taken thousands of forms, but the gesture repeats. Hands reach, crust cracks, steam escapes. Someone passes a piece to someone else. Human history can be very dramatic, as you may have noticed. But sometimes its deepest rhythm is simply this: we make food, and we give it to one another. A mainstream historical fact rests inside the loaf. Bread has been one of the most widely important staple foods across human societies, shaping agriculture, settlement, labour, trade, religion, class, empire, war, and politics. It is not the only staple. Of course, rice, maize, millet, potatoes, cassava, and many other foods have fed enormous parts of the world. Bread is not the whole human story, but it is one of the oldest and most persistent ways people have turned grain into daily life. You run your thumb along the crust, it flakes slightly, leaving tiny crumbs on your skin. That simple texture carries an enormous chain of labour. Someone prepared the soil, someone planted seed, rain fell, or did not fall enough. Sun ripened the field, grain was cut, dried, stored, milled, mixed, salted, fermented, shaped, baked, sold, carried, sliced, or wrapped. The loaf looks still, but it is crowded with motion. It is a quiet meeting place of weather, work, skill, hunger, and time. Bread also remembers inequality. Some people ate white loaves while others lived on coarse crusts. Some owned mills and ovens while others paid to use them. Some sweetened bread with sugar grown through forced labour. Some waited in ration lines. Some marched because the price was too high. A loaf can comfort, but it can also accuse. It can reveal who controls land, who sets prices, who eats first, who goes without, and who is expected to be grateful for crumbs. You break the loaf open. The sound is gentle, a dry crack followed by the soft pull of the inside. The crumb is warm and slightly moist. It brushes your fingertips like a sponge made of grain and air. A little steam touches your face. The smell deepens. You take a bite. First comes the crust, crisp and roasted. Then the interior softens against your tongue, mild, salty, faintly sweet. You chew slowly, and the flavour grows. Bread teaches patience even when eaten quickly. That is rather sneaky of it. A quirky tidbit belongs to the modern life of bread. Many cultures have expressions that use bread to mean money, work, livelihood, or basic survival. People speak of earning bread, breaking bread, daily bread, breadwinners, bread lines, bread baskets, and bread and butter issues. The loaf has slipped into language so thoroughly that even when no actual bread is on the table, it is still hanging around in the sentence, looking pleased with itself. Few foods have such excellent public relations, yet bread is also personal. It may remind you of toast in a childhood kitchen, a bakery passed on the way to work, a festival loaf, a grandmother's recipe, a street flatbread eaten while travelling, a sandwich packed in paper, a crust dipped into soup on a cold night. Bread can hold memory without needing to explain it. The smell alone is enough. Warm bread enters the mind through a side door and finds rooms you forgot were there. Scholars still argue about many parts of bread's long history. They debate exactly how early bread-like foods were used, how leavening spread, how ordinary people ate in different periods, how much bread caused or merely expressed political unrest, and whether modern bread culture represents progress, loss, or both. The evidence changes as archaeology, food science, and historical methods improve. Burned crumbs are re-examined, old recipes are tested, grain residues are studied. The story keeps rising slowly because history itself ferments when new questions are added. You look at the table and notice the crumbs scattered there. Crumbs are humble evidence. They are what remains after hunger has been answered, imperfectly, but warmly. A crumb can fall from a royal feast, a worker's lunch, a sacred meal, a soldier's ration, a child's sandwich, or a quiet midnight snack. It does not announce its class once it has fallen. It simply rests on the table, small and golden, waiting to be brushed into the hand. The atmosphere around the loaf softens. You hear a knife laid down, the faint scrape of a chair, the hush of breath, the low murmur of someone speaking in another room. The cloth beneath the bread is warm where the loaf has rested. The air is full of that calm bakery scent, the kind that makes the body believe, at least for a moment, that things can be made whole, not perfect. Bread has never promised perfection, just nourishment, just enough warmth to continue. Bread has started revolutions because it lives where politics touches the body. People may endure many injustices in silence, but hunger sharpens the voice. A government can seem distant until the loaf shrinks. An empire can seem powerful until grain ships fail. A market can seem efficient until children cannot eat. Bread exposes the truth beneath speeches. It brings grand systems down to the table and asks whether everyone has a piece. But bread has also started mornings, friendships, journeys, prayers, markets, and homes. It has given shape to ordinary hours. It has made soup into supper and loneliness into a shared meal. It has travelled in baskets, saddlebags, ration tins, lunch boxes, paper sleeves, plastic wrappers, and bare hands. It has been dense, soft, sour, sweet, flat, risen, steamed, fried, toasted, stale, sacred, suspicious, beloved, and occasionally overbaked by someone who insists the oven runs hot. Not that they forgot it. You place the loaf at the centre of the table. It looks simple there, but simplicity is not emptiness. It is the final calm shape of countless human efforts. Field becomes flour, flour becomes dough, dough becomes bread, bread becomes memory, memory becomes story, and story, told softly enough, becomes rest. The room grows quieter, the loaf cools, its crust no longer sings, but the warmth remains inside a little longer, hidden in the crumb. You let your hands rest on the table, palms open, dusted with flour and tiny flakes of crust. The long road of bread does not end in a museum or a monument. It ends wherever someone is hungry and someone else offers a piece. Now the light fades gently. The table softens at the edges. The last crumbs rest like tiny stars on the cloth. Outside, the night gathers itself without hurry, folding streets, fields, rivers, mills, ovens, and markets into one deep quiet. You breathe in the faint scent of warm grain and let it become softer with each breath. The loaf is no longer a history to follow, only a comfort nearby, cooling in the peaceful dark. Your shoulders loosen. Your thoughts grow slower. Somewhere, an oven's heat fades to ash, and somewhere else, dough is rising for morning. For now, there is only the calm table, the sleeping room, and the gentle memory of bread passing from hand to hand. Warm enough, simple enough, enough.